What's up, guys? Welcome to Bald Voldemort. We've got something special today. What if Harry was claimed by Hades and the killing curse became his healing spell? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The boy who lived the night the Potters died. The sky above Godric's Hollow did something no one in the village could explain the next morning. The stars went out. Not all of them, not forever, but for exactly 3 seconds every point of light in the sky above that small street simply vanished, as though something vast had turned its attention downward and the universe had held its breath. Then they came back. The stars returned, the crickets resumed their singing, and in a small house at the end of a lane a baby boy sat in the ruins of his nursery and laughed. Not cried. Laughed. The scar on his forehead was fresh and bleeding, and the green light had long since faded, and Lord Voldemort was gone, scattered, broken, fleeing in a form that barely deserved the word. But Harry Potter sat amid the plaster dust and the broken crib and laughed at something only he could see. Something that stood at the edge of the room, where the shadows were thickest and deepest, and watched him with the patient attention of something that has existed since the first living thing ever stopped living. Hagrid found him an hour later, still awake, still laughing, one tiny fist closed around something that wasn't there. Nobody asked what the baby was holding. Nobody thought to. 10 years passed. The Dursleys' house on Privet Drive was the kind of house that tried very hard to be unremarkable. Vernon Dursley watered this quality like a prize garden. Normal curtains, normal car, normal sun, normal life. The abnormality lived in the cupboard under the stairs and was, by general household agreement, to be spoken to as little as possible. Harry had long since stopped minding the cupboard. It was small and dark and smelled of old trainers, and in the dark you could see things more clearly. He'd figured that out when he was about 5. In the dark, if he lay very still and didn't think too hard, he could see the edges of things, a faint luminescence around living creatures, a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The cat Mrs. Fig's ugly orange Tom that sometimes wandered in through the garden gate glowed like a coal. Dudley, sleeping in the bedroom above, pulsed with the dull, steady light of someone deeply, contentedly alive. Harry glowed differently. He'd caught his own reflection once in a dark window, the right kind of dark, and the light around him was green. He didn't think about it much. He thought about it the same way he thought about the fact that birds sometimes landed on his shoulders even when he stood perfectly still, or that the grass in whatever patch of garden he weeded always grew back lusher and stranger than it had any right to, or that 3 times in his life he had held something dying and felt it decide not to. The first time he'd been 4. A sparrow had hit the kitchen window and dropped into the garden, and Harry had picked it up and felt it going, felt the warmth leaving it the way water leaves a cloth, and without thinking, without any conscious intention at all, he had pushed back. Green light, so faint it was barely there, had flickered from his hands, and the sparrow had blinked and righted itself and flown away, and Harry had stood there for a long time after looking at his palms. Aunt Petunia had seen from the kitchen window. She'd gone so white that Harry had thought she might faint. She hadn't talked about it. She never talked about it. She talked about a lot of things, Dudley's diet, the neighbors, the shocking price of everything, but whatever she'd seen through that kitchen window was sealed behind her eyes in a place she was never going to open. The second time he'd been 7, and it had been Mrs. Fig's cat after all, hit by a bicycle on the road outside. Harry had carried it into Mrs. Fig's garden because it had seemed wrong to leave it in the road, and when the life went out of it, he'd felt the green warmth come up through him again, steadier this time, more certain, like a muscle he hadn't known he had but had been exercising all along. The cat had sneezed and looked at him with the specific offended dignity that cats reserve for situations they find undignified, and walked away. Mrs. Fig had watched from her doorstep. Unlike Petunia, she hadn't gone white. She'd looked at Harry with something that wasn't quite surprise and said very quietly, "Oh. Oh, it's you then," which had made no sense at all, and when Harry had asked what she meant she'd said nothing and given him stale cake and sent him home. The third time, the summer before Hogwarts, it had been Dudley's goldfish. This was the one Harry thought about least because the look on Dudley's face, not grateful, never grateful, but scared in a way that was different from his usual performance of being scared, had stayed with Harry longer than any of the others. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. He folded the knowledge of himself into the same small, quiet place where he kept everything else. The inexplicable things, the green light, the shadows that moved toward him rather than away, and he went on living the way you live when you're not sure yet what you are, which is to say, carefully and with your eyes open. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday, and it arrived 11 times before Vernon Dursley conceded that perhaps the house had a postal situation. When Hagrid broke down the door of the shack on the rock and said, "Happy birthday, Harry, you're a wizard," Harry's first reaction was not surprise. His second reaction, looking at the enormous man in the doorway, was not fear. His third reaction, the one that settled in his chest like something slotting into place after years of being slightly wrong, was something very close to relief. I know, Harry said. Hagrid blinked. Most kids I have to tell him a bit more. The magic, the school, I know about the magic, Harry said. I've always known about the magic, I just didn't know it had a name. What he didn't say, what he kept folded in the quiet place, was that wizardry didn't quite cover everything. Wizardry was the letter was part of the truth. But Harry had the distinct feeling that the whole truth was something larger, something older, something that the letter hadn't been written to explain. He bought his wand, 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather, and the wandmaker Ollivander had gone pale and murmured something Harry hadn't quite caught, something about the other one. He bought his books and his robes and an owl he named Hedwig. He stood at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and breathed once and walked through without hesitation. The way you walk through a wall when you've always known walls are optional. The Hogwarts Express smelled of pumpkin pasties and coal smoke, and the particular excitement of a couple hundred children going somewhere wonderful. Harry found a compartment and sat in it and watched the countryside unspool past the window and thought about nothing in particular. Ron Weasley fell through the compartment door 20 minutes outside London, tripped over his own trunk, apologized to the trunk, and then grinned at Harry with such total absence of self-consciousness that Harry immediately liked him. Everywhere else is full, Ron said. Can I sit down? Harry said, and Ron sat, and that was that. Hermione Granger appeared later, looking for a lost toad, and stayed longer than the toad search required because she had found something more interesting than a toad, which was a boy who answered her very direct questions about his understanding of transfiguration with something other than blankness. She had read all her books already. Harry had read his, carefully, in the cupboard under the stairs, and found that they made a kind of sense to him that went beyond the words, as though the concepts were not new information, but vocabulary for things he already knew in his bones. You've clearly done some reading, Hermione said in the tone of someone paying a compliment that they consider quite significant. I live in a cupboard, Harry said. There's not much else to do. Ron looked at him. You live in a cupboard, under the stairs? That's terrible. It's actually quite good for thinking, Harry said. Hermione looked like she had opinions about this, but she set them aside. Do you know what house you want to be in? Harry considered this. He'd read about the houses. Gryffindor, brave; Ravenclaw, clever; Hufflepuff, loyal; Slytherin, ambitious. None of them had struck him as a particularly complete description of anything real. I'll find out when I get there, he said. Well, I hope it's Gryffindor, Hermione said. Dumbledore was in Gryffindor. So was you-know-who, Harry said, and then corrected himself. Voldemort before he was Voldemort. The temperature in the compartment dropped slightly. Ron flinched. Hermione stared. You said his name, Ron said. That's his name. Yeah, but most people don't. I know, Harry said. I've never understood that. He understood it, actually. The name was power, and people who feared the thing gave the name its power, and it became a self-reinforcing loop of terror. Harry had thought about this in the cupboard. He'd thought about a lot of things in the cupboard. What he'd concluded, 17 pages into the rise and fall of the dark arts, was that Voldemort was a man who had mortally feared death, and had, in fearing it so absolutely, become a very effective mechanism for producing it in others. Harry found this more sad than frightening. What he didn't say, what went back into the quiet place, was that since reading about Voldemort and the killing curse and the night in Godric's Hollow, he had begun to suspect something about the green light in his hands. He didn't have a framework for it yet. But green light and killing curse and I was there and it didn't kill me sat together in his mind in a way that he was going to have to eventually look at directly. Not today. Today there were pumpkin pasties and a new friend with chess pieces that told the other chess pieces off, and the silhouette of a castle rising out of the dark above a black lake, and Harry let it be enough. The Great Hall was everything the books had said it was, and Harry barely looked at the enchanted ceiling. He was looking at the ghosts. Not because ghosts were strange, he'd known about the Hogwarts ghosts from his reading. He was looking at them because they could see him. Not just observe him the way the students and teachers were observing him, the famous Harry Potter doing his famous walk, but see him in the way that creatures on the same frequency of existence can sometimes perceive each other. Nearly headless Nick turned from his float above the Gryffindor table and looked directly at Harry with an expression of profound surprise. The Bloody Baron, over at Slytherin, went very still. The Grey Lady at Ravenclaw tilted her head at a curious angle, like a bird hearing a new sound. Harry looked back at each of them steadily. Then he looked away, because the Sorting Hat was being placed on a stool at the front of the hall and he had a situation to navigate. He watched the other first years go up. He watched Hermione stride up with her chin raised and come down Gryffindor a minute later looking satisfied. He watched Ron, visibly sweating, become Gryffindor after 4 seconds. He watched Neville Longbottom, pudgy, nervous Neville who'd lost his toad and found it again before they'd even left the train. spent almost a full minute under the hat before it called Gryffindor in a slightly uncertain tone, as though it had considered the matter more than once. Then they called Potter Harry, and the hall went so quiet you could have heard a quill drop from any table in the room. Harry walked to the stool. He sat down. He let Professor McGonagall set the hat on his head, and the brim dropped over his eyes, and then something ancient and peculiar and extremely interested spoke directly into the inside of his skull. "My," said the sorting hat. My, Harry waited. "I've sorted 11,403 students," the hat said, "in rather a long time doing this job. I have never felt quite this." "Felt quite what?" Harry thought back at it. "You're marked," the hat said. It didn't sound alarmed. It sounded the way a scholar sounds when they've found a primary source they'd thought was mythological. "Not just by the curse, I can see what everyone already knows about that. The lightning bolt is very readable." "No, number, you're marked by something older. Something that doesn't generally take much interest in individual humans." "I know," Harry thought. The hat was quiet for a moment. Do you really?" "I know enough." He paused. "I know more every day." "The houses," the hat said, getting back to business with the air of something that recognized a force of nature and was going to work around it. "Bravery, yes, considerable. Intelligence, yes, and the kind that frightens certain teachers. Loyalty, yes. Ambition, I want to say no, but what I actually see isn't quite ambition. It's something more like certainty. You already know you'll do what you set out to do. That's not ambition. Ambition requires doubt." "Which house?" Harry thought. "The question," the hat said, "is which house needs you. And the answer, I think, is the one that will give you the most room to be precisely what you are." A pause. "And what you are, Mr. Potter, is nothing I have a category for. But your instincts are brave and your heart is not fearless. No one is fearless, but you've made friends with fear the way most people never manage. I think that's very Gryffindor. Very. If only because courage looks different on you than it does on anyone else." "Gryffindor," the hat bellowed, and the hall erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something caught between professional composure and genuine unease, which was interesting because nothing he'd done yet should have unnerved her. He would think about that later. He walked to the Gryffindor table, sat between Ron and Hermione, accepted a handshake from Ron and a nod from Hermione, and looked up at the head table. Dumbledore was watching him. Not in the celebrity spotting way most of the hall had been watching him, but in the careful, measured way of a man who has done a great deal of preparation and has just discovered that his preparation may be operating on the wrong set of assumptions. He had the bluest eyes Harry had ever seen, and they were entirely unreadable. Harry looked back, steady and unhurried, and after a moment Dumbledore smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, with something complicated running underneath it, and looked away first. Harry turned back to his plate. Feast had appeared, the hall had filled with noise again, and Percy Weasley was explaining something about prefect responsibilities that Ron was ignoring. "How long did it take?" Hermione asked. "The hat, I mean." "A bit," Harry said. "What did it say?" Harry considered what to tell her. "That I don't fit any category," he said, which was true and also not quite enough of the truth to be dangerous. "In the end it said Gryffindor anyway," Hermione nodded. "It said something similar to me. About how I'd do well in Ravenclaw, but I'd be better in Gryffindor, more challenged." She paused. "I don't know what it meant exactly." "It meant," Ron said through a mouthful of roast potato, "that you're going to argue with teachers, which is definitely a Gryffindor thing. In Ravenclaw they all agree with each other and it's terribly boring." "How do you know what it's like in Ravenclaw?" Hermione said. "My cousin," Ron said. "She says they have discussions. Gryffindor has arguments much better." Harry laughed. It felt easy. It felt for the first time in a very long time like something he was allowed to do. The weeks passed and Hogwarts revealed itself layer by layer, the way a place only does when you're paying attention. Harry paid attention. He paid attention to everything, the classes and the shortcuts and the way the staircases moved, and also to the things that didn't make it into the guidebooks. He paid attention to the way magic worked differently in his hands than in anyone else's. Not dramatically, not in a way that made his professors say anything during the first weeks, but in small, persistent ways. In charms, when he cast Wingardium Leviosa, the feather didn't just float, it drifted upward as though comfortable, as though the air wanted to hold it. In Transfiguration, his matchstick became a needle on the first try, and when McGonagall came to check it, she held it for a long moment before setting it down with a careful expression. In herbology, the plants in his pot grew visibly stronger every time he touched them. Defense against the dark arts was the class he dreaded the most, because Professor Quirrell was the problem. Not in any way he could have articulated to a teacher or a prefect. Quirrell smelled of garlic and fear and something else. Something underneath. Something cold and purposeful that Harry felt in the same way he felt the life in living things, except inverted. Like a drain in the floor of a room, pulling everything toward itself. Harry had sat through the first lesson with the green light in his palms quietly, steadily warm, the way it always was near death, and had watched Quirrell stammer and fuss and trip over his props and had thought, there is something in that room that does not want to be alive. He didn't think it was Quirrell. Quirrell was afraid of it. He filed this away. He went back to the dormitory and sat on his bed and thought about it carefully, the way you think about something that needs to be approached from the right angle before it resolves into sense. You all right? Ron said, looking up from his exploding snap hand. Fine, Harry said. What do you know about Professor Quirrell? Dad says he was perfectly decent before he went traveling, Ron said. Came back a bit odd. Mum says the garlic's ridiculous. Did he go anywhere specific when he was traveling? Ron shrugged. Albania, I think. Why? Just curious. Ron looked at him for a moment. Ron had a very good internal calibration system for when someone was just curious and when they weren't, and then looked back at his cards. You'll tell me if it's important, he said. Yes, Harry said and meant it. The Friday of the third week, he stayed after defense class on the pretext of a question about the reading and watched Quirrell clear the board with his back to Harry, and stood there in the empty classroom and felt the cold pull from behind the purple turban like a tide. Up close it was much stronger. There was a soul there, if you could call it that, fragmented, desperate, ancient in its fury, pressed against the inside of Quirrell's skull and hating every moment of it. Was there something you needed, Potter? Quirrell said without turning around. I wanted to ask about the practical next week, Harry said, whether it'll cover shield charms. No, Quirrell said. Not until spring term. Harry looked at the back of his head. Thank you, Professor, he said and left. In the corridor outside, the green light in his palms pulsed once, warm and steady like a heartbeat. He thought, I know what you are. Then he thought, you know what I am too, don't you? That's why you never look at me directly. He smiled at that, a small private smile, and went to Transfiguration. The library was where he went when he needed to think, which was increasingly often. Hermione was frequently there, and they had developed a comfortable shared silence that occasionally broke into conversation when one of them found something worth talking about. On a Wednesday evening in mid-October, Harry found something worth talking about in a very old, very damaged book shelved in the back of the restricted section's outer wall, technically accessible, but so worn and strange that no one had apparently checked it out in living memory. The title had faded off the spine. The first legible chapter heading read, Of Underworld Powers and Their Marks Upon the Living. He read for 3 hours. Hermione looked up once and observed that he'd gone pale. Are you all right? She said. Read this, Harry said, and pushed the book across the table to the right page. Hermione, read. Her expression went through several stages, cycling from skepticism to concentration to something quieter. She read it twice. Then she looked up at Harry. Greek myth, she said carefully, the older traditions, not the sanitized ones. Yes. It says that when Hades claims a living person, really claims them, binds them before their death is due, they become, what's the word it uses? Thanatophoros, Harry said. Death-bearer. The text translates it loosely, but the original Greek is. I can see the original Greek, Hermione said, because she'd been learning it from a supplementary textbook for reasons Harry had not questioned. Death-bearer. Someone who carries death as a force rather than a destination. The text says they can, she paused. Harry. The green light, Harry said quietly. I've had it my whole life. I healed a cat, I healed a bird, and I think the night in Godric's Hollow, he stopped. The killing curse is what Hades uses to claim the dead. It's his mark. When Voldemort used it on me, he wasn't casting it at someone unprotected. He was casting it at someone who was already his. The library was very quiet. Somewhere in the stacks, a book reshelved itself with a soft thud. It bounced back, Hermione said slowly. It couldn't kill me, Harry said. It's a healing force when it touches me, a restoration. It undoes death instead of causing it, and if it bounced back at Voldemort, it undid some of his life, Hermione said. She sat back. She looked at him like she was revising every calculation she'd made since she met him. Harry, this is not in any of the school books, not any of them. This is ancient, Harry said. Older than Hogwarts, older than British wizarding tradition. He paused. I think I've always known, I just didn't have the vocabulary. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful precision she brought to important things, Are you frightened? Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the green warmth in his palms and the way the shadows moved toward him and the cold pull of the fragment behind Quirrell's turban and the stars going out above Godric's Hollow. He thought about 11 years in a cupboard with the knowledge of himself, unnamed and untranslated, always there. No, he said. And then because it was Hermione and she deserved more than one word. I've been living with this my whole life. Knowing the name of it doesn't change what it is. It means I'm not making it up. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, then she nodded once firmly with the expression of someone who has made a decision. Right, she said. Then we find out everything we can. She pulled the book toward herself and produced a notepad. Starting with what exactly the limitation of a Thanatophoros is, because I'm not accepting marked by Hades as a complete operational description of your powers without source material. Harry sat back and watched her write notes in her small, precise hand and felt something expand in his chest. Not the green warmth, not the old quiet power, but something simpler and more ordinary and much harder to name. He thought it might be belonging. On the 31st of October, the troll came. Harry did not handle it the way the books would later describe it, in the sparse accounts that made it into school records. The account said Harry Potter and Ronald Weasley dispatched the troll with quick thinking and in Wingardium Leviosa. This was true in the way summaries are true, technically accurate and almost entirely misleading. What actually happened was that Harry walked into the girls' bathroom and found Hermione backed into the corner under the sinks, and the troll 12 feet high and reeking and mid-swing with a club the size of a tree trunk, and something in Harry went very still and very cold in a way that had nothing to do with fear. He raised his wand. The green light came, not a spell, not a charm, not anything in the standard curriculum, green and steady and certain, and it hit the troll in the chest with a sound like a bell being struck. The troll sat down. Its eyes went wide and confused. Then it began to cry thick, ugly, bewildered tears, and after a moment it rolled onto its side and fell asleep with a vibration that shook the floor. Ron arrived 30 seconds later, wand out, to find Harry standing in the center of the bathroom looking at a sleeping troll, and Hermione emerging from under the sinks looking at Harry with the expression of someone filing a great deal of new information very rapidly. "What," said Ron, "did you do to it?" "I asked it to stop," Harry said, which was not accurate but was also not entirely wrong, "with green light. I calmed it down," Harry said. "Trolls they have very low life force, very small, loud but small. I pushed some energy into it, it went quiet." Ron looked at the snoring troll. He looked at Harry. "You calmed down a troll," he said. "Yes, a mountain troll." "It seemed the fastest option," Harry said. Ron thought about this for a moment. Then he nodded, with the pragmatic adaptability of someone who has grown up in a large magical family and has therefore recalibrated their definition of normal many times. "All right," he said, "we still have to tell McGonagall." They told McGonagall. McGonagall took points from Hermione for being there, then looked at Harry, then didn't take points from Harry, then looked at the sleeping troll again with an expression that suggested she was adding something to a file that already had quite a lot in it. Walking back to the common room, Hermione nudged Harry's shoulder with hers. "You knew it would work," she said quietly. "Before you did it, you already knew." "Yes," Harry said. "That must be," she said, considering her words, "a very interesting way to live." Harry thought about the cupboard and the birds and the cat and the quiet green warmth that had been with him since before he could remember. "It has its moments," he said. And Ron, walking on his other side, said, "Right, pumpkin pasties, I saved some in my pocket, don't judge me." And the three of them went upstairs, and Harry thought, not for the last time, that the most extraordinary thing that had happened to him this year was not the troll or the book in the library or the cold horror behind Quirrell's turban. It was this, just this. These two people walking next to him, not afraid. Chapter 2, Green Flame. November at Hogwarts arrived like a bad mood, gray and cold, and settled in for the long haul. The lake went dark and opaque, the grounds turned to mud, and the castle responded by making itself warmer and stranger, fires burning in grates that hadn't been lit in years, tapestries rustling in drafts that had no source. Harry liked November. He liked the way the dark came early and the torches in the corridors threw long shadows, and the shadows were his. He'd started testing that quietly, carefully. Nothing dramatic, just small things. Walking down a corridor and letting his hand drift close to the stone wall and feeling the shadows lean into his fingers the way a cat leans into a hand. Sitting by the lake in the early mornings before breakfast, in the gray pre-dawn, and watching the mist move around him in patterns that didn't entirely match the direction of the wind. It wasn't control yet, not exactly. It was more like a conversation with something that had always been trying to talk to him and had only recently found a common language. Hermione had filled 2 notebooks already. She'd sent for books from home, her parents had posted them. A box of Greek mythology texts and 1 academic work on chthonic deity traditions that made the owl delivering it list slightly to one side from the weight. And she approached the whole project with the systematic intensity she brought to everything, which meant that Harry now knew more about ancient Greek religious tradition than most university professors, and had a list of confirmed abilities that Hermione had titled in her neat handwriting. Documented capacities. HP, which Harry had looked at once and found both flattering and slightly clinical. Ron, who had been told the full version of things 3 days after Halloween because keeping it from Ron felt dishonest, and Harry had decided very early that dishonesty wasn't worth the maintenance cost, had responded with a silence that lasted roughly 45 seconds and then said, "So when you said you calmed the troll down, you literally just drained it with death powers." And Harry had said more or less, and Ron had said brilliant in a tone of such genuine, uncomplicated admiration that something in Harry's chest had done something complicated. "You're not, it doesn't bother you?" Harry had asked. "What, that my best mate is claimed by a Greek death god?" Ron had said. "Harry, I grew up with Fred and George. My threshold for concerning is genuinely quite high." The first Quidditch match of the year was on the 12th of November, Gryffindor versus Slytherin, and it was the kind of cold that got into your gloves no matter how well charmed they were. Harry loved flying. He discovered this about himself with a purity of feeling that was almost simple. It was just joy, uncomplicated, the kind that doesn't need explanation. On a broom, at speed, chasing something, all of the deeper strangeness of himself went quiet, and there was just air and acceleration, and the tiny golden flash of the snitch somewhere out there in the gray sky. The match was 40 minutes old when Draco Malfoy, playing Slytherin Seeker in the particular aggressive style of someone whose father had bought his position, pulled level with Harry and said something about his robes that was technically a comment about the quality of Gryffindor's kit, and actually a comment about the fact that Harry had bought his robes secondhand. Harry looked at him sideways. Malfoy was pale and sharp-featured, and had the particular kind of confidence that came from a life in which being Malfoy had been sufficient, the name itself doing most of the work. He looked at Harry the way people who expected to be feared looked at someone who wasn't fearing them, with a specific species of irritation. "Nice broom," Malfoy said, which was more honest, because Harry's Nimbus 2000 was objectively nicer than his. "Saw the snitch," Harry said and went. He heard Malfoy curse and wheel after him, heard the crowd below shift into noise, and then he was pulling a dive, the stands coming up fast, the snitch weaving and darting in that maddening way snitches had, and everything shrank down to the golden thing and his own outstretched hand. He didn't feel the jinx until his broom bucked. It was subtle, not a blunt instrument but a precise interference, a targeted vibration in the enchantments of the broom that started small and built, like a fault in a wheel. His Nimbus went from obedient to violently wrong in the space of 3 seconds. It spun without input. It kicked. It dropped 10 feet and then jerked upward, and Harry locked his legs around the shaft and held on with both hands because the alternative was 60 feet of open air and the commentary box. The stands went from excitement to something more complicated. He could hear Hermione from somewhere below shouting something at Ron. He could hear Lee Jordan's commentary stammering into something that wasn't quite a description of Quidditch anymore. Harry, for his part, assessed the situation with the cool patience of someone who has learned that panic is a waste of metabolic resources. His broom was being controlled by something. Not mechanical failure, he could feel the external pressure in the enchantments the way he could feel the life in living things, the same sensitivity in a different register. Something was directing this. Something was trying to throw him. He looked up at the stands and felt, with the specific precision that had been sharpening all term, the cold pull. The drain. The thing behind the turban, which was at the match because Quirrell was at the match because all the teachers were at the match, and it was sitting in the stands looking up at him with a focused, hungry attention, and doing something very deliberately with the tip of a wand buried in its robes. Harry thought, "You really should have waited until I couldn't see you." He stopped fighting the broom. Instead, he did something that he hadn't done deliberately before, that he had only done by instinct with the troll. With the cat, with the bird, he reached not with his hands but with the thing underneath his hands, the green force, the warmth that went in the direction that cold things feared, and he pushed it outward, not in a bolt or a beam but in a wave, a pulse, the way a heartbeat travels through a body. The jinx on his broom dissolved like ice in warm water. The nimbus steadied in one smooth instant, like a horse finding its footing. There was a sound from the stands that Harry would later learn was the sound of Quirrell, 200 meters away, falling off his seat and into Professor Snape, who was sitting next to him, and who had, according to several witnesses, been muttering what appeared to be counterjinx work under his breath. Harry stored this information away without acting on it immediately, because there were more pressing priorities, specifically the snitch, which had taken advantage of the general chaos to drift toward the far end of the pitch. Harry went after it. He caught it with his teeth technically, because his hands had been occupied and his face arrived at the snitch's location a fraction of a second before his fingers did. He straightened up, spat the snitch into his palm and raised his fist, and the Gryffindor stands went absolutely mad. He landed on the grass and Hermione hit him so hard in the shoulder with both hands, not a hug exactly, more a collision of enormous relief, that he almost sat down. Ron was making a sound that was somewhere between shouting and a language that didn't have words yet. "Your broom," Hermione said. "In the stands I could see it, it was jinxed, Harry, someone was." "Quirrell," Harry said quietly and watched the word land. Quirrell, she said, the thing behind the turban, it didn't want me catching the snitch, or it wanted me falling off a broom in front of the whole school, which either that's theatrical or it was sending a message. Why would it? Because it can feel what I am, Harry said, the same way I can feel what it is, and I don't think it knows exactly what to do about that yet. He opened his fist and looked at the snitch, which whirred in his palm with small golden wings. Which is useful information. Ron was looking between them with the expression of someone who has decided they want the full debriefing immediately after the victory party. Later, Harry said to him, after the party, full explanation. There had better be biscuits, Ron said. The victory party in Gryffindor Tower lasted until 1 in the morning, at which point Percy Weasley invoked prefect powers and it became a smaller, quieter gathering of people who were still too wound up to sleep. Fred and George had produced butter beers from somewhere that no one investigated, and the fire was enormous, and Harry sat on the hearthrug with his back against the base of the couch and felt, for a while, simply good. Wood had shaken his hand approximately 7 times. Hermione was in the armchair above him with a notebook open in her lap but not writing in it, which meant she was thinking. Ron was conducting a post-match chess analysis with his pieces who were having opinions about it. Can I ask you something? Ron said, not looking up from his board. Yes, Harry said. When you steadied your broom and I could tell something happened, it wasn't just the jinx breaking, it was something else. Did you do that on purpose or did it just happen? Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Somewhere in between, he said. I knew what I was doing, I understood the mechanism. But it was more intention than technique, like the difference between knowing you want to walk somewhere and knowing the exact biomechanics of walking. But you could do it again. Yes. If you wanted to, if I wanted to, or if something required it, he paused. It's getting clearer, everything is getting clearer. Like at the beginning of term I could feel the life in things, feel the shadows, feel Quirrell's what's in Quirrell. But it was like hearing music from another room. Now it's like being in the room, Hermione said from the armchair, not looking up. Yes, Harry said. Ron moved a pawn, the pawn complained. So, Ron said carefully, what's the plan about Quirrell? About whatever Quirrell is carrying. I don't have enough information yet, Harry said. I know what it is, a fragment of Voldemort, something he split off from himself. I think the book called it there was a word in the Greek text, remnantsol, Hermione said, this time looking up. It's not quite the Greek technical term, but it's the closest translation. A fragment of consciousness forced to survive beyond the body's death. It's not natural, the book was very clear about that. It described it as something that offends the natural order because it's supposed to have moved on. Supposed to have crossed over, Harry said, past the veil. And it hasn't, Hermione said. Which means it's wrong, fundamentally against the rules of how things are supposed to work. And Hades' representative on Earth, Ron said slowly, is probably the person most qualified to enforce those rules. He picked up his king and turned it in his fingers. That's what you are, isn't it? It's not just healing people. You're the one who's supposed to make sure the dead don't come back. The fire popped. Outside the tower windows, the November wind was doing something with the trees. Harry sat with that for a moment. I hadn't put it in exactly those words, he said. Is it wrong? Ron said. No, Harry said. No, it's more or less right. Hermione had gone back to writing. Ron put the king back on the board. They sat in comfortable silence, and Harry stared into the fire and thought about fragments of souls and natural orders and what it meant that Voldemort, the man who had spent his whole life refusing to die, had fractured himself trying to kill the one person in the world whose entire nature was the authority Voldemort was running from. There was an irony in it that Harry thought Hades would appreciate. December arrived, and with it the particular Hogwarts version of Christmas preparation, which involved Professor Flitwick directing students in hanging magical ornaments while standing on a stack of books, and garlands that moved slightly and occasionally tried to rearrange themselves, and the general atmosphere of a building that had been holding Christmas for several centuries and had developed strong opinions about how it should be done. Most of Gryffindor was going home for Christmas. Harry was not. Neither was Hermione, who had Christmas plans with her family that were happening after school, and she was staying the extra 4 days to do research. Ron was also staying, his family having communicated through a complex Weasley family logistical chain that Harry hadn't fully mapped that there was some matter of Brother Bill visiting and the house being at capacity. Harry didn't mind. He preferred Hogwarts empty. The castle was different when the students were gone, older, quieter, more itself. The staircases moved with more purpose. The suits of armor had opinions. It was on the second night of the Christmas holiday, unable to sleep and disinclined to try, that Harry found the room with the mirror. He was walking the 5th floor corridor because the 5th floor in December had something that he'd been meaning to investigate. A cold spot. Not Quirrell's cold and not the ambient chill of an old castle in winter, but a specific deep cold that he associated with places where the veil was thin, where what was on the other side pressed close. He'd been tracking it for a week with the same methodical patience Hermione brought to her research. He found it not in a hidden chamber or a specially significant location, but in a room that smelled of disuse and had clearly been serving as additional furniture storage. Chairs were stacked against the walls, broken desks, and in the center, on four legs that were elaborately carved, stood a mirror taller than Hagrid. Harry took it in, the gold lettering around the frame, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. He parsed it in under 5 seconds. I show not your face but your heart's desire. He'd always been good with wordplay, with reversals and patterns. He stood in front of it and looked at what it showed him. He'd expected something. He'd expected parents, maybe. He'd read enough about mirrors and wishes, and wanting to know that an orphan's heart's desire was often a straightforward equation. He'd expected Lily and James Potter warm and alive, and the knowledge that this would hurt in a specific way he was prepared for. The mirror showed him a room with no walls. A space that went on in every direction and was filled with a soft, dark light, not the absence of light but the presence of a different quality of it, the light that exists in places where the living don't usually go. And in the room stood figures more than he could count, and they were all looking at him with expressions of, not love exactly, but recognition. Familiarity, the specific warmth of people who have been waiting. One of them stepped forward. She had his eyes. She had green eyes that were the color his power was, and she looked at him with an expression that had too many things in it to name quickly, but the largest one was proud. Lily Potter raised her hand and touched the glass from the other side, and the cold spot that Harry had been tracking all week sharpened and focused directly here, and he understood all at once that this mirror was not just an enchanted object. It was a window. The enchantment was a frame that someone had put around something that existed already. "Mum," he said to the figure in the mirror. Her lips moved. He couldn't hear it. The glass was between them, glass or something like glass, and sound didn't carry. But he read her lips had always been good at reading lips. Years of listening through walls had given him the skill, and what she said was, "I know, it's all right, we're all right." Harry stood there for a long time. The cold spot was warm now, paradoxically. The veil was thin here, and thin meant close, and close meant the warmth that came from that direction was the warmth of everything that had passed through. He put his own hand against the glass. The figures in the room behind his mother, the dozens, the hundreds, faces he didn't know, all of them were looking at him with that recognition, that waiting warmth, and Harry understood that he was not looking at his heart's desire the way the mirror intended. He was looking at his domain. He stepped back. He looked at the mirror for a long moment with a steady gaze, and then he did something that no one who had ever stood in front of this mirror had done. He smiled at it. A small, quiet, private smile, the kind you offer something that has tried to do you a kindness by showing you the truth. "I know," he said to the mirror, to his mother's reflection, to the hundreds of faces watching from the other side. "I'll be there eventually, but not yet." He left the room and went back to bed and slept without dreaming, which was unusual. Generally, he dreamed in green. When Dumbledore found Harry at breakfast the next morning and sat down across from him, the gesture had the quality of something that had been considered and prepared. Dumbledore poured himself tea and offered Harry a lemon drop, and when Harry declined, looked at him with those unreadable blue eyes. "I see you found the Mirror of Eris," Dumbledore said. "Last night," Harry said. "I was following the cold spot on the 5th floor. I've been tracking it for a week." Dumbledore's teacup paused halfway to his mouth. "The cold spot," he said. "There are several in the castle," Harry said. "Places where the boundary is thin, places where what's on the other side is close. That one is the strongest because of the mirror. The enchantment on it opens something. I don't think that was intentional when the mirror was made. I think it was a side effect. It's not dangerous," he added, because Dumbledore's expression had moved toward a kind of careful professional concern, and Harry didn't want the mirror moved. "The veil being thin isn't dangerous. It's just geography." Dumbledore set his teacup down with great precision. "And what did you see?" he said. "My mother," Harry said, "and the people she's with on the other side." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "It's not a sad image, sir. I think the mirror misunderstood what to show me. It was trying to show me something I desire, and what it showed me was something I'm going to have access to eventually anyway. It's not a loss, it's a destination." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Outside the Great Hall's enchanted ceiling, snow was beginning, small and precise. "You are," Dumbledore said finally, "not what I was expecting." "What were you expecting?" Harry said. "A boy who needed protection," Dumbledore said honestly, and Harry appreciated the honesty. "A boy who needed guidance, someone to shape the path." "I might still need guidance," Harry said. "I'm 11, there are a lot of things I don't know yet." He looked at his porridge. "But I don't think the path needs shaping, I think I know where it goes." "And where is that?" Harry looked up at him. "Back to Voldemort," he said, "back to the thing he's become." He ran from death his whole life and found ways to cheat it, and the fragment of him that's in this castle is desperate and scared and wrong in the way that something is wrong when it is not where it is supposed to be. He kept his voice level, matter of fact. That's what I'm for, that's the role, I'm not angry about it, I'm not scared of it, I just need to be ready when it's time. Dumbledore looked at him for what felt like a very long time. Snow fell in the enchanted ceiling. The candles burned. I would like to help you prepare, Dumbledore said, if you'll allow it. Yes, Harry said, but I want you to tell me the truth, the real version. Not the version that's shaped to make me feel what you want me to feel or do what you've planned. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'll listen to everything you know, but I'll make my own decisions. Dumbledore's smile, when it came, was the most genuine thing Harry had seen from him. It was also unexpectedly something close to relief. Agreed, Dumbledore said. They had a very long, very honest conversation over breakfast, and Harry learned several things that clarified his understanding significantly, and Dumbledore learned several things that rewrote his understanding entirely. It was, both of them agreed in different ways afterward, a better beginning than either of them had expected. January returned the students to the castle in a wave of noise and luggage and chocolate frog wrappers. Ron came back with a new chess set and a jar of Mum's biscuits and the air of someone who had processed quite a bit of thinking over Christmas and arrived at conclusions. Right, Ron said, setting the biscuits on Harry's bed and sitting down, I've been thinking about Quirrell. So have I, Harry said. And Hermione wrote me 3 letters over Christmas about the soul fragment theory, which she wrote me 4, Harry said. She clearly has strong feelings about, but here's what I keep coming back to. Ron leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. There's something in the school, you can feel it. It's in a turban on a stuttery defense professor, and at some point it's going to do something because things that are wrong and scared don't just sit quietly forever. They move, they push. So what's it trying to get? Harry nodded. He'd been thinking about this since November. The 3rd floor corridor, he said. The one Dumbledore told everyone not to go near at the start of term feast, Ron said. There's something there. I can feel it from here, not clearly, but like a room above this one. Oh wait, he looked at Ron. Whatever it is, it's heavily guarded. Dumbledore told me over Christmas, he didn't give me the full detail, but enough. Something was moved from Gringotts, something important enough to hide. And Quirrell, the thing in Quirrell wants it, Ron said. It needs it, Harry said, needs it to get a body back, to become real again instead of a fragment pressed against someone else's skull. He thought about the cold pull he felt every time Quirrell was near, the desperate hunger of it. It's been planning since before the school year started. Quirrell was chosen because Quirrell was weak enough to be possessed and positioned enough to access a school. So what do we do? Ron said. Harry was quiet for a moment. We make sure it fails, he said. When it moves, it will come to me, maybe not deliberately, but because I'm what it has been circling all year. It can feel me the way I can feel it. We're like magnetic poles. He looked at the jar of biscuits Ron had brought and thought briefly of his mother's face in the mirror. When it moves, I'll be ready. Ron opened the biscuits. He handed Harry one. All right, he said, but we're telling Hermione. We were always going to tell Hermione, Harry said. Just clarifying, Ron said, because sometimes you two have research conversations that leave me out and I end up finding out about things after the fact, and I want a heads up when we are actually going to go face a soul fragment of the darkest wizard in a century. Fair, Harry said. Full team briefing. No exclusions. Excellent, said Ron. Biscuit. February brought the detail Harry had been waiting for. He found it not through research or conversation but through direct sensation. One evening in late February, walking past the 3rd floor corridor after a late library session, he felt something new. Not just the weight of the guarded thing. Something below it circling, disturbed. The fragment was testing the defenses. He didn't say anything that night. He went back to the dormitory and lay in his bed in the dark and reached out with the deep sense, not his eyes, not his wand, but the older perceiving faculty that had been with him since he was born, and felt the shape of the problem. A stone, something bound in protections. Something that would give a shredded soul exactly what it needed to reconstruct itself. And between the stone and the fragment, between Quirrell's desperate plotting and the object of it, the corridor's guardians, traps, creatures, puzzles. Substantial. Built by people who knew what they were doing. But built for one kind of danger. Harry lay in the dark and thought about the difference between a trap built for a human intruder and what would happen if the intruder was something that death bent around rather than through. He thought about what it would mean to walk through those defenses with green fire in his hands and the patience of something ancient and sure behind his eyes. He thought, not yet, but soon. Then he thought, when it happens on my terms, not Voldemort's. Outside his window, Hedwig came back from her evening flight and settled on her perch with the ruffled dignity of a barn owl who had seen snow. She considered personally offensive. Harry watched her in the dark, her white feathers luminous, and felt the warm pulse of her life, steady, bright, unquestionable. "Good night," he said to her. She clicked her beak once in what he had learned to read as her version of the same. He closed his eyes. Downstairs, somewhere below them all, the fragment waited and schemed and circled its prize with a hunger that Harry could feel like a splinter in the air. He was not afraid of it. He had never been afraid of it, but he was aware. Alert. The way a river is aware of a dam. Not threatened, not concerned, but carrying the full weight of what happens when the pressure builds high enough and the structure finally gives. The dam would give. Harry knew exactly what would happen when it did. He went to sleep. Chapter 3, Lord of the Threshold March came in loud and left louder, and somewhere in the middle of it, everything changed. Harry felt it on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic sensation, not lightning in his scar, not the vivid cold pull that Quirrell's presence always carried. Just a shift, the way pressure shifts before a storm, the way the air in a room changes when someone has made a decision in it. He was in Charms, levitating a series of increasingly complicated objects while Flitwick squeaked encouragement, when the feeling settled over him like a hand on his shoulder. Something had started moving. He glanced at Hermione. She was focused on her own charm work, tongue between her teeth, two pencils orbiting her head in a neat ellipse that was frankly beyond the scope of the exercise. He looked at Ron, who had got his objects moving and was now attempting a figure-8 pattern entirely on his own initiative and mostly succeeding. Neither of them felt it. Why would they? It wasn't their frequency. Harry set his quill down very carefully on the desk. "Mr. Potter," Flitwick said. "Everything all right?" "Fine, Professor," Harry said. Yes, I'm fine." He picked the quill back up and finished the lesson and said nothing, because saying something required a plan, and a plan required information, and information required a conversation that couldn't happen in the middle of Charms. The conversation happened that evening in the far corner of the common room, in the armchairs by the window that they'd unofficially claimed as their corner since October. "It's starting," Harry said, no preamble. They both looked up immediately, and he thought not for the first time that there was something remarkable about having people who didn't need the context explained. "Moving toward the corridor," Hermione said. "Not yet, but a decision was made. Today or yesterday, something committed." He turned his teacup in his hands. "Quirrell is going to move. I don't know if it's tonight or this week, but it's coming fast." Ron leaned forward. "We should tell Dumbledore." "I told Dumbledore in January that this was coming," Harry said. "He knows. The defenses are in place. They were always in place. The question is whether the defenses are enough," and he paused. "They're not for what Voldemort is. The protections were built for a wizard. A skilled one, a dangerous one, but a human one who is afraid." He set the teacup down. "Voldemort isn't afraid of the protections, he's afraid of me. Which means he will move fast and quietly and try to have the stone before I know it's happening." "But you already know it's happening," Hermione said. "Yes. So the advantage is yours," she said. "The advantage is mine," Harry agreed. Ron looked between them. "Are we going down there?" he said. "To the corridor." "I am," Harry said. "You don't have to." "Obviously we're coming," Ron said immediately, before Hermione could even open her mouth. "Don't do the noble thing where you say you're going alone. It's annoying, and it's not even accurate because we'd just follow you anyway." Harry looked at him. "You'd follow me into a corridor full of traps designed to stop a dark wizard." "I'd follow you into a corridor full of dark wizards," Ron said. "The traps are a bonus. At least the traps aren't going to be rude about your robes." Hermione had already opened her bag. "I've been reading about the protections since January," she said, producing a roll of parchment dense with her small handwriting. "There's a logic puzzle component that I've mapped 3 possible solutions to. There's a plant, devil's snare, almost certainly, which has a simple counter. There are other components I've inferred from context, and I have working theories." She looked up. "I've been preparing for this since you told me it was coming." Harry looked at her, he looked at Ron. Something in his chest did the complicated thing again. "Tomorrow night," he said. "If the feeling gets stronger before then, sooner, we'll know when." "Agreed," Hermione said, folding her parchment back up. "Agreed," said Ron. "Can we do homework now? Because I have an essay on goblin rebellions that's not going to write itself, and I've been using this conversation as an excuse to avoid it." "You've had 3 weeks," Hermione said. "And I've spent them mentally preparing for a confrontation with a Dark Lord," Ron said. "It's called prioritization." The feeling got stronger on Thursday. Harry woke at 2 in the morning with the cold pull so sharp and present it was practically a sound. A low continuous pull, like water through a crack, running in a direction that was specifically down and north and urgent. He sat up in bed and sat with it for a moment, calibrating. Quirrell was moving, not planning anymore. Moving. He got dressed in the dark, moving quietly through the dormitory with the ease of someone who'd spent years being invisible in small spaces. He touched Hedwig's perch on the way past, and she opened one golden eye at him. He didn't say anything. She closed the eye, she knew. Ron was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, and Harry wasn't surprised. Ron didn't have Harry's sensitivity, but he had an extremely good sense of when Harry was about to do something significant, developed through months of close observation. Now, Ron said. Now, Harry said. They woke Hermione with a quiet knock on the girls' dormitory door, which earned them a hissed lecture from Lavender Brown that Ron deflected with an apology of such sincere sounding, regret that even Harry was briefly impressed, and the three of them slipped through the portrait hole into the castle's nighttime. Hogwarts at 2 in the morning was a different architecture. The torches burned low, throwing amber pools in the dark, and between the pools the shadows were very deep and very present and entirely comfortable with Harry in the way that things in their natural element are comfortable with what belongs there. He moved through the dark with the loose confidence of someone who has never, not once in their life, been afraid of the dark because the dark is where he is most himself. "You look different," Hermione murmured, walking close behind him. "In the dark. Like more." "Like more," Ron said. "More himself," she said. "Like in daylight he's condensed, like the rest of him is just out of frame." Harry glanced back at her. "You can see that." "I've been looking," she said simply. They reached the third-floor corridor. The locked door at the end of it was already open, not broken, not forced, just open, which meant the lock had been handled from the inside, which meant Quirrell had already passed through. Harry pushed the door open and looked down the stairs into the dark below. The cold pull was coming from down there, strong and purposeful, moving through layers of enchantment and obstacle and challenge, and underneath it, underneath the cold, underneath the fragment's hunger, Harry could feel what it was moving toward. A warmth, red and bounded, tightly controlled like a coal in a closed fist. The stone was down there, alive in the way that extraordinary magical objects are alive, and Voldemort was going to reach it or Harry was going to make sure he didn't. He stepped through the door. The Cerberus, 3 heads, enormous, took up most of the room on the other side, and it should have been the crisis point. The book said it was the crisis point. The music box in Quirrell's Trail of Disturbances was still tinkling softly on the floor, keeping all 3 heads drowsy, but the spell was fading, and 2 of the 3 heads were already twitching toward wakefulness. Harry looked at the creature. 3 sets of enormous eyes, half open, filmed with enchanted sleep. 3 sets of nostrils, wide and scenting. He had approximately 30 seconds before it was fully awake and considerably fewer before it registered them standing in the entrance. He didn't reach for his wand. He reached with the older thing, the green warmth, gentle and certain, and he pushed it outward the way he had with the troll, except softer, more deliberate. The Cerberus was not a threat to be subdued. It was a guardian doing its job, and it had 3 hearts, all of them large and warm and full of a life that deserved respect. He found all 3 simultaneously, the way a chord finds 3 notes, and asked them very gently to continue sleeping. All 3 heads settled back onto the floor. The tinkle of the music box died out, but the creature slept on, breathing in a synchronized rumble that vibrated through the stone. Ron let out a breath behind him that he'd clearly been holding since he saw the thing. "Right," he whispered. "Brilliant, can we?" The trapdoor was already open. Quirrell's trail was clear. Harry dropped through first. The devil's snare was exactly what Hermione had predicted, and it got about 2 seconds of purchase on Harry's arm before he looked at it with an expression of mild interest. And the plant, registering what it had grabbed and making a rapid reassessment, released him and drew back with the specific reluctance of vegetation that has rethought an aggressive decision. Ron fell through into the plant's grasp and had the presence of mind to stay still after Hermione said, "Don't struggle," and the Lumos Solemn she cast a moment later drove it back entirely. Ron dropped to the floor and looked at the retreating tendrils. "Did it just let go of Harry?" he said. "The plant sensed him and decided it wasn't worth it," Hermione said. "The plant made a strategic decision." "Apparently," Harry said, "he was already moving forward following the trail. Keep up." They went through the winged keys. Harry caught the right one with an ease that suggested the swarm of flying keys either cooperated with him or parted for him the way the shadows did. Ron never quite worked out which. And through the chessboard, which was the worst of it and the part Harry was most honest about afterward. He was terrible at chess and Ron was not. "Go around the outside," Ron said, studying the board with narrowed eyes. Give me a minute." He walked the edge of the board and the chess pieces on their side watched him with the attentive respect of soldiers who recognize a general. "Right, Harry, you're a bishop, Hermione, you're a rook, I'll be the knight. We can win this in maybe 7 moves, 8 if the other side plays well." "Will it be dangerous?" Hermione said. "The pieces are real," Ron said. "They hit hard, but I'm not planning to lose any of us." He looked at the board with total calm. "I never lose." He didn't lose. He sacrificed himself, stepping deliberately into a position where the opposing queen took him out. A collision that sent him sprawling and left him winded on the cold stone. and did it so smoothly and with such clear-eyed intention that Harry didn't understand what had happened until the board cleared and Ron was getting up from the floor with a split lip and an expression of profound professional satisfaction. "Check and mate," Ron said to the opposing king, who tipped itself over in surrender. "Ron," Harry started. "I'm fine," Ron said, wiping his lip. "Chess pieces aren't allowed to kill you, just knock you around, house rules." He grinned, bloody-lipped and pleased. "Go. I'll catch up or Hermione can get a teacher." "Both," Hermione said firmly. "I'm going back for Dumbledore and you're sitting down." She looked at Harry and her expression was he would remember this later, not afraid for him and not worried about what he was walking into, but something more like, "This is what you're for, go do it." "Be careful," she said. "I know," Harry said. And then, because it was Hermione and she was the person who had sat in a library with him and translated Greek and filled 2 notebooks with careful research, and said we find out everything we can, "Thank you." She nodded once, crisp and certain. Harry went forward. The last chamber was quiet. Remarkably quiet, the kind that exists when 2 people who have been circling each other all year finally stop circling. A fire burned in a shallow pit at the far end of the room, and in the chamber's center, facing away from Harry as he walked in, stood Professor Quirrell. Before Quirrell on a pedestal was the Mirror of Erised. Harry stopped. He hadn't expected the mirror here. It had been moved, apparently, since Christmas, repositioned as the final mechanism of concealment. He understood immediately why. The stone was inside the mirror's logic. You could only retrieve something you wanted to use, not something you wanted to have. Dumbledore's final elegant trap. Quirrell turned around. His face was different this close to the end of something. The stammer was gone. The fearful, fussy manner of the man in the classroom was gone. What was left was someone hollowed, someone who had been carrying a guest for so long that the lines between host and inhabitant had blurred, and what looked out of those eyes was not entirely Quirrell anymore. "I wondered when you'd come," Quirrell said. His voice was steady and unhurried. "It's been aware of you all year, like a compass needle. It knows what you are." "I know what it is," Harry said. Quirrell's head tilted, not quite a human gesture. "Remarkable, the boy who lived. I'd expected something less certain." "Everyone does," Harry said. He looked at Quirrell without the wariness he'd have used in class, without the careful, neutral expression he maintained in defense to avoid giving anything away. He looked at him directly, and the cold pull was enormous now, enormous and so close, pressed against the inside of Quirrell's skull with a force that was almost physical. It was aware of him. It had been aware of him since September, circling, reassessing, trying to build an understanding of what he was. What it had built was incomplete. That much was obvious, because it was still here, still trying to retrieve the stone. If it had truly understood what Harry was, it would have been running. "Step away from the mirror," Harry said. Quirrell smiled, the smile of someone else, someone who had learned to smile as a tool rather than an expression. "The stone is in there," he said. "I've been trying to retrieve it for weeks. Some enchantment prevents me, allows only someone who does not want to use it to take it. A clever piece of work." He looked at Harry with the full weight of whatever was behind his eyes. "But you, perhaps you, with your particular nature, you might reach in and find what I cannot." "You think Hades claimed wants a resurrection stone," Harry said. "Everyone wants something." "I want Voldemort gone," Harry said, "permanently, past the veil. Where he was supposed to go 14 years ago." He took another step into the room. "The stone isn't what I'm here for." The fire in the pit changed color. Not dramatically, just a degree cooler, a degree greener, the green of new leaves and old magic, the green that had been in Harry's hands his whole life. It wasn't intentional. It happened the way his power had always happened, when something focused his attention organically without performance. Quirrell noticed. The thing behind Quirrell's eyes noticed more. "You can't," Quirrell began. "Don't," Harry said gently. "Don't use him to threaten me. He's been threatening me since I was 1 year old and I'm still here. He's the one who ran." The voice that came out of Quirrell's mouth next was not Quirrell's. It was deeper and more layered, the voice of something that had been powerful once and was working with a fraction of itself and hated both the diminishment and the truth of it. "You are a child," it said. "I'm your natural predator," Harry said, without heat, without drama, like a fact, because it was a fact. "You spent your whole life running from death, and you killed my mother trying to kill me, and all you did was knock yourself down to a shred, and put your mark on someone already claimed by the one thing in the universe you cannot negotiate with." He stopped walking when he was 5 feet from Quirrell, and the mirror was visible past his shoulder, the reflection in it showing something that Harry didn't look at directly because he didn't need to. "You should have run. When you felt me in September, you should have left this castle and gone as far away as you could get. And you would have followed," the voice said. "Yes," Harry said, "but this would have happened on better ground for you. Here, in a room under a school, with a fragment instead of a body and a stolen man instead of yourself, here you have nothing." Quirrell moved fast. He was a capable wizard even now, even compromised, even shared. He had learned things in Albania. in forests where the fragment had taught him in the way that something desperate will teach whatever tool it has left. And the curse he threw was not the killing curse but something nastier, more targeted, a dark binding that Harry had read about in the restricted texts, that was designed to sever a living thing from its own animating force. Harry's hand came up and the green fire came with it. Not as a beam, not as a directed spell, it simply came, the way heat comes from a fire, radiant and filling the space between them, and the dark curse hit the wall of it and came apart. Threads of dark intention in a wash of warm green dissolving like smoke in wind. It wasn't violent, it wasn't a contest. It was what happens when you take a temperature reading and the thermometer disagrees with the weather. Quirrell threw two more, they dissolved. He tried a physical attack, grabbed for Harry with both hands, the desperate move of someone who has exhausted their prepared strategies and is working on instinct, and Harry let him. He let Quirrell grab his arm and the green warmth in his skin met the cold of Voldemort's possession, and what happened was not a dramatic explosion or a burst of power. It was a quieter mechanism. The fragment inside Quirrell felt Harry's nature directly. Skin to skin, no glass between them, it felt what Harry was, the authority of it, the certainty. The ancient patience of something that exists on the far side of every ending, that has been waiting since before the concept of patience existed. The fragment flinched, and in flinching it pulled. And in pulling, it did what fragments do when they are panicking. It grabbed for the body it was in, it clung. And the body could not sustain that level of frantic energy and also sustain a confrontation with the one thing the fragment feared most in the world. Quirrell screamed. Harry stepped back and let him go, and the scream was not pain from Harry's touch. Harry had not hurt him, but the sound of a man whose passenger was consuming him in its urgency, its desperation, its need to be anywhere else. The fragment tore free. It came out of Quirrell like smoke comes out of a chimney, except a chimney controls the process, and this was uncontrolled, ragged, a tearing that left Quirrell collapsing to the floor and the fragment forming a shape in the air above him. A face. Voldemort's face, or the shape of it, the idea of it, reconstructed from memory and will and 3/4 of nothing. It looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The face in the smoke had hatred in it, the specific, clarifying hatred of something that has been afraid for a very long time and is in the presence of the thing it fears most. But underneath the hatred, Harry could see what was really there. He could see it the way you see through shallow water to the bottom, rippled, distorted, but unmistakable. Voldemort was terrified. "It's time," Harry said, and it was very quiet and it was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who understands that the worst part of a long fear is not what happens at the end but the waiting before it. "You've been running from this for 50 years, you must be so tired." The face distorted. A sound came out of it, not language, just sound. The protest of something that has made its entire existence into a refusal and now encounters the inevitable. Harry raised his hand and the green light came, warm and full and absolute, and it washed through the fragment the way morning light washes through a dark room when the curtains are opened. Not destruction, not annihilation. A door opening. Voldemort, what remained of Voldemort, went through it screaming. The chamber went quiet. The fire in the pit returned to orange. Quirrell lay on the floor, breathing shallowly, abandoned by his passenger, and the exhaustion and damage of 9 months of possession was evident in every line of him. He was alive. Harry checked this with the same green sense, felt the thin but definite warmth of a life still burning, and settled into something between relief and resolve. He crossed to Quirrell and crouched beside him and put his hand on the man's chest and sent green warmth into him, not healing a wound or reversing a spell but reinforcing a life that had been drained and used and depleted to its edge. Quirrell's color improved slightly. His breathing steadied. "You'll be all right," Harry said. Whether Quirrell heard him or not, he didn't know. He stood up and looked at the mirrors. The stone was visible now, glinting in his reflection's hand. His reflection had picked it up, was holding it out, and Harry reached into the mirror's frame and his fingers closed on something small and warm and dense. The stone sat in his palm. A dark red gem, faceted, alive with a warmth that was not Hades' warmth but something adjacent to it, the warmth of transformation, of change at a fundamental level, of the border between one state and another. Harry closed his fingers around it. He thought about what it could do. He thought about his mother's face through the glass at Christmas, her hand on the other side, "We're all right." He thought about what it would mean to use a resurrection stone on someone who was already where they were supposed to be. He put the stone in his pocket and stood up in the quiet chamber and waited for Dumbledore. Dumbledore arrived 8 minutes later, moving fast for a man of his age, and apparently having come in through a different route than the one Harry had taken. He stopped in the doorway and took in the scene with the rapid, comprehensive assessment of someone who has been in a great many situations that required rapid, comprehensive assessment. Quirrell on the floor, Harry standing, the mirror intact, the fire orange. Voldemort, Dumbledore said. Gone, Harry said. Not destroyed, I don't destroy things, but moved on past the veil. He paused. Or that fragment did, he has others. I could feel it when the fragment went, I felt the remaining pieces of him elsewhere, scattered, still existing. Dumbledore sat down on the floor, which was not something Harry had expected him to do. He simply sat down, his robes pooled around him, and looked at Harry with an expression that was processing a great deal very quickly and wasn't entirely sure where to file all of it. He'll come back, Harry said. Not tonight and not next year probably, but the pieces of him that are left will gather toward each other. He'll find a way. He looked at Quirrell, who was breathing evenly now. He planned too well for one failure to end him. No, Dumbledore said quietly, I don't suppose it does. He looked up at Harry. The stone, Harry held it out. Dumbledore took it and he looked at it in his palm and then he looked at Harry. You could have used it, he said. Most people who have held that stone couldn't put it down without using it. I have a different relationship with death than most people, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said slowly. Yes, I'm beginning to understand that. He stood with rather more effort than Harry's arrival had required. He pocketed the stone. You should go to the hospital wing. I'm fine, Harry said. You confronted the remnant of the most dangerous dark wizard and I'm fine, Harry said, not unkindly. He couldn't touch me, sir. He's never been able to touch me, not really. He looked at the mirror one last time at his own reflection, which showed nothing unusual now, just Harry, just himself. Can I ask you something? Of course. He has more pieces of himself scattered around. Other fragments like this one, only possibly more stable, more embedded. I could feel them tonight dimly when this one was destroyed. Like when a thread snaps, you can feel the whole string go taut. He met Dumbledore's eyes. You know about them, don't you? Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. I have suspicions, he said carefully. Tell me, Harry said. Not now, I know you need to think about how, but soon. He glanced at Quirrell. You'll make sure he's all right, of course. He was a victim, Harry said. Whatever he chose to do that let the fragment in by the end he didn't want to be doing what he was doing, I could feel that. He said it without asking for anything in return, just offering it as information, as truth. Dumbledore nodded. I know, he said softly. I've known for some time. I'm sorry I couldn't. You were being cautious, Harry said. About me. You wanted to see what I was before you committed to being on the same side as me. He didn't say it with accusation. He understood it. I would have done the same. Dumbledore looked at him with something that might have been, in a less composed man, the expression preceding tears. I believe you would have, he said. Harry nodded. He walked out of the chamber, back through the chess room where Ron's knocked pieces were rearranging themselves irritably, back through the winged keys and up through the trapdoor and back through the sleeping Cerberus, all three heads still out, breathing with a deep and comfortable synchrony, and up the stairs and out of the corridor and back into the ordinary castle. Hermione was waiting at the end of the corridor with Ron, Ron's split lip treated and his eyes wide, and Professor McGonagall standing behind them with an expression that suggested she had been told enough to be concerned and not enough to be anything else. She looked at Harry with those sharp eyes and then very specifically chose not to ask any of the 17 questions Harry could see forming. Hospital wing, she said crisply. I'm fine, Harry said. Nevertheless, McGonagall said. Harry looked at Hermione, who had the expression of someone trying not to smile and mostly succeeding. He looked at Ron, who was not trying not to smile at all. Is he? Ron started. The fragment is gone, Harry said. Ron's smile got wider. Hermione's composure dropped entirely, briefly, and she grabbed his arm and held it, not in the panicked way she'd grabbed him after the troll, but in the way of someone who needed a physical confirmation that the person they were worried about was solid and present and real. Go to the hospital wing, Harry, she said, squeezing once and then releasing. Just go, let Madame Pomfrey fuss at you for half an hour. It'll make her feel useful. And it'll make me feel better, Ron said, and I'm the one who took a hit from a chess queen tonight, so I think I'm owed. Harry went to the hospital wing. He let Madame Pomfrey run her diagnostics, all of which came back normal, then unusual, then baffling, and then she stopped running diagnostics and gave him hot chocolate with a slightly stunned expression. He drank the hot chocolate. He looked out the window at the grounds, the lake dark below, the forest beyond it. Somewhere out there, scattered and diminished and furious, Voldemort's remaining fragments clustered in the dark. Harry could feel them, faint and far, like distant fires on a horizon. They burned with the particular desperation of something that would not accept its ending. He thought about what he'd said to the fragment in the chamber. You must be so tired. He thought about what it would take to end this, really end it. All of it, every fragment, every piece of a soul that had been chopped up and scattered and hidden in the irrational belief that divided was safer than whole. He thought about the pieces embedded in objects, embedded in places, embedded in people. Something in the back of his mind said very quietly, and he went very still. He thought about a scar, about a lightning bolt. About the night in Godric's Hollow and a curse that had bounced back and what exactly it had done in the moment it struck him and didn't kill him. He pressed 2 fingers to his forehead. The scar was warm. It was always warm. He'd thought that was the healing, the constant low-level repair that his nature performed automatically, closing a wound that had been opened by dark magic. He'd never questioned why it hadn't fully healed in 11 years. He'd assumed his nature was compensating for active dark magic, maintaining equilibrium. He sat very still in the hospital wing with a cup of hot chocolate going cold in his hands and thought, what if it's not a wound? He didn't pursue it. Not tonight. Tonight the fragment was gone, and Quirrell was alive, and Ron and Hermione were down the corridor in the chairs outside the ward door that Madame Pomfrey had told them were not for waiting outside the ward purposes, and they were absolutely using for exactly that purpose. Tonight was for the hot chocolate and the dark lake and the particular feeling of having done something significant. Tomorrow was for the harder questions. He pressed his fingers to his scar one more time, feeling its warmth, and filed the question away with all the others in the quiet place. Then he leaned back against the pillows and closed his eyes, and the green warmth in his palms was steady and sure, and outside the windows the night was very large and full of stars. The end of the year came the way the end of things comes when they've been full too fast and not quite enough. Exams were sat, points were counted. Dumbledore's end-of-year speech included a redistribution of house points that gave Gryffindor the cup, though not for the reasons the rumor mill produced. McGonagall had a long private meeting with Harry on the last Thursday of term that he didn't discuss with anyone except Ron and Hermione. And what he told them was partial but enough. He wants to continue, Harry said, over the summer teaching me not as a student but as I don't know how to describe it, like an apprenticeship but older than that word. Will you? Hermione said. Some of it, Harry said. He knows things I need to know about the fragments, about Voldemort's history. He paused. About my own history, some of which I suspect he has and hasn't shared yet. The stuff about your scar, Ron said with the directness that Harry had come to rely on. Possibly, Harry said. He was careful around that subject in a way that suggests he has a theory he's not ready to share. Which means he's either protecting me or protecting himself from a conversation he doesn't want to have. Either way, you'll have it eventually, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said, I will. On the last night, Harry walked to the lake alone in the June dark and stood at the edge and felt the water and the giant squid somewhere far below, vast and slow and alive in the satisfied way of things that have existed in the same place for a very long time. He felt the forest, full of centaurs and the dark things that had their own ecosystems of life and death. He felt the castle behind him, teeming with the lives of 500 students all in various stages of packing and celebrating and dreading going home. He felt very faintly the veil, a gossamer thinness in the air, present the way it was always present. And through it, not visible, not speakable, just felt warmth, recognition, the specific warmth of someone on the other side who knows you're there. I'll be back, he said, to the castle and the lake and the warm recognition through the veil. Next year, he turned and walked back inside, his shadow long behind him in the light from the open doors, and he thought about the question he'd put away in the hospital wing and the other fragments and the long work ahead, and he was not afraid of any of it. He was, if he was being precise about it, exactly what the Sorting Hat had said, certain, not fearless, but so deeply at home in himself and in his purpose that fear had no place to get a foothold. He went back to his friends and the feast and the train tomorrow. Everything else could wait. Chapter 4. The chamber below. The summer between first and second year was the summer Harry stopped being careful. Not reckless, he had never been reckless. Recklessness required a certain carelessness about consequences that his nature didn't permit. But careful in the sense of contained, of folded in, of keeping the green warmth to minimal expressions, because the Dursleys' house was a place where anything extraordinary became a problem to be punished. He'd been careful there for 10 years and the habit had grooves worn into it. He stopped. That was all. He simply decided he was done with it. The Dursleys noticed within the first week. Vernon had made a comment about freakishness over breakfast, and Harry had looked at him across the table with clear, steady, entirely mild eyes, and said, Uncle Vernon, if you say something like that again, I'll ask the portraits in Hogwarts to look up what a howler is and send you one at your office. And something in the way Harry said it, not threatening, not angry, just absolutely certain of itself, made Vernon go a particular shade of plum and not finish his sentence. Petunia had watched this from the kitchen doorway. She'd looked at Harry for a long moment with the complicated expression she'd been wearing since the kitchen window incident when he was 4. Then she'd said breakfast, Vernon, and the subject had closed. It was different after that. Not warm, the Dursley household was not going to become warm, the architecture of it was too established but different. A détente. Harry had the garden to himself in the mornings, which he used to read, and in the evenings he was left alone in his room, which he used for the letters that went back and forth to Hermione, and Ron with the consistency of a postal service that Hedwig managed with fierce professional pride. Hermione's letters were dense and researched and occasionally included footnotes, which Harry had started responding to with his own footnotes, which she'd told him in her 5th letter was the best response she could have received. Ron's letters were shorter and funnier and occasionally included chess problems, and once in August, a baffling hand-drawn diagram of a Quidditch play that Ron had apparently invented and wanted Harry's assessment of, and which Harry had studied with genuine interest and improved with 3 annotations. The summer's most significant development arrived in early August, not by owl but by enchanted telephone, specifically Hermione's voice slightly tinny through the receiver, saying, "Harry, I found something and I think you need to know it before term starts." She told him about Tom Riddle. Not the name. Harry had known the name from Dumbledore's end-of-term conversation, which had included the historical background on the man who'd become Voldemort, his origins, and his trajectory. What Hermione had found was a specific gap in the historical record, a 7-year period between Riddle's leaving Hogwarts and his re-emergence in European wizarding society as a changed and dangerous figure. What she'd found in that gap, cross-referenced across 3 obscure texts, one of which she'd had to acquire from a specialist bookseller, was a pattern. Objects, she said. Specific objects, historically significant, powerfully enchanted, collected during that period. There's a diary mentioned in a 1953 account of Borgin and Burke's inventory, a black diary unmarked. A cup that had belonged to Helga Hufflepuff sold to an intermediary. A locket that had been in the Gaunt family. A pause. "Harry, the fragments you felt when the piece in Quirrell was destroyed, you said they felt embedded in objects, potentially in places. Potentially in people," Harry said. Silence. "Then you still think that?" "The scar," Harry said. "I haven't pressed it yet. I need the right framework before I start examining myself for a piece of Voldemort, but yes, I still think it's possible." "The diary would be in current circulation," Hermione said. "It's not in any collection I can trace. It's unaccounted for." "Which means it's been given to someone," Harry said, "to use or to carry." "And if it's anything like the Quirrell fragment, it'll be able to act," Harry said. "It's not dormant, not just a vessel. These pieces of him were made deliberately. He would have given them intent, agency, limited but real." The line was quiet for a moment. Outside Harry's window, Hedwig was watching him from her perch with the alert attention she gave to conversations she sensed were important. "2nd year," Hermione said. "If it's in circulation, if it ends up in someone's hands at Hogwarts, then I'll deal with it," Harry said. It was not bravado. It was the same quality of certainty he'd brought to the chamber under the school, the same voice the Sorting Hat had heard and recognized. "Stay safe this summer, keep the research. We'll compare notes on the train." "Harry," she said. "Yes. Are you?" A pause that was not like Hermione's normal pauses, which were organizational. This was different. "Are you all right about the scar thing?" The possibility. Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the question, about what it would mean to be carrying a fragment of Voldemort's soul, about whether that changed anything, about whether it should frighten him. "I've been carrying whatever is in this scar for 12 years, he said. "If it's a fragment, it's been there my whole life and it hasn't changed what I am. If anything, I think my nature has been containing it, holding it." He touched the scar unconsciously. "I'm not frightened of it. I'm curious about it. There's a difference." Another pause. Then Hermione said, with the warmth she put into words when she meant them most fully, "Right, good, that's very you." "Is it?" "Completely," she said. "See you on the train." September arrived, and with it the particular joy of the Hogwarts Express, and Hermione and Ron, and 3 hours of productive conversation that covered the Horcrux theory. Hermione had found the word in a restricted text and pronounced it with the careful gravity of someone naming something they wish didn't need naming. The likely location of several, and Ron's summer, which had included a trip to Egypt to visit his brother Bill, and which Ron described with such enthusiasm that Harry spent 20 minutes genuinely absorbed in descriptions of curse-breaking methodology and the specific political dynamics of Egyptian magical communities. "You'd love it," Ron told Harry. "The tombs. The things in the tombs. Bill says some of them haven't been opened in 3,000 years and you can feel it when you walk in this weight," he said, "like standing under deep water. Places where the veil is thin," Harry said. "Ancient sites of significant death." "Yeah," Ron said. "Bill said he felt watched the whole time. I didn't feel anything, but I was also 11 and more focused on the scarabs." "I'd like to see it someday," Harry said, and meant it. They arrived at Hogwarts and the school absorbed them in its familiar way, and Harry walked into the Great Hall and felt the castle settle around him like something that had been waiting patiently without complaint, but with the specific quality of waiting that very old things do, which is to say it was waiting the way the stone itself waits, deep and certain. The ghosts were the first to notice his return. Nearly headless Nick did his floating near the ceiling approach that Harry had learned to read as his version of a greeting, and the Bloody Baron, who spoke to Harry now, in the particular low formal register he reserved for things he considered significant, drifted past the Slytherin table and gave him a nod that was very nearly respectful. New year. New teachers. Harry assessed them the way he assessed everything, with the patient, comprehensive attention of someone who knows that surfaces are only the first layer of a thing. Professor Sprout he already knew and liked. Professor Flitwick remained excellent. The new defense against the dark arts teacher, however, presented a case study of a different kind. Gilderoy Lockhart arrived at the staff table in robes of a particular shade of turquoise that suggested, among other things, that he had spent considerable time thinking about the color turquoise. He had the smile of someone who had refined smiling into a professional skill, and the hair of someone who had resources and the will to deploy them, and he looked at the assembled students with the warm, proprietary appreciation of a man who expected to be adored and generally was. Harry ate his dinner and watched Lockhart and thought, he has never faced anything real. Not once. You could see it in him the way you could see health in a living thing, not in the presence of something but in the absence of it. Lockhart had the absence of the particular quality that real danger leaves in people who survive it, like a room that has never been rained in. He's something, Ron said. He's frightened, Harry said. Hermione looked up from her pumpkin juice. Lockhart, he seems extremely confident. He is, Harry said. But it's the confidence of someone who has never been genuinely tested and knows, somewhere under the performance, that they haven't. People who have faced real danger and come out of it are a different kind of confident. They're quieter about it. He speared a roast potato. He'll be a problem, not a dangerous one, a loud one. Hermione looked at Lockhart with the expression of someone revising an assessment. She had been excited about Lockhart before Harry had said this, and Harry could see the recalibration happening in real time. He felt a small, private guilt about it. His books might still be useful, he said. The magical creatures sections are probably partially accurate. Hermione's expression indicated this was insufficient consolation, but she would manage. The first strange thing happened in October. A cat. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, found in a corridor near the second-floor girls' bathroom, stiff and gray-eyed and not dead. Harry had felt that immediately. Not dead but suspended, hung between states, the life still in her but frozen in a way that was neither living nor crossing over. He'd crouched over her in the corridor, the students around him going pale and backing away from the message written on the wall in something dark and deliberate. The chamber of SCCRETS has been OPENED. Enemies of the air beware. And he'd put 2 fingers on the cat and felt the specific magical signature of what had happened to her. Not death magic, basilisk magic. The indirect gaze of something whose direct gaze killed absolutely, whose indirect gaze petrified, and Harry thought basilisk and immediately filed through everything he knew about basilisks, which was not negligible because he'd been reading the sections of his textbooks that other students skipped and several of the older texts in the library's outer shelves. Filch arrived. Filch made sounds that would have been heartbreaking in a more complicated man. Harry stood up before Dumbledore arrived and said clearly to the gathering students, "She's not dead, she'll recover. Someone's going to want to treat her with Mandrake Restorative." Then he stepped back and let the teachers do their jobs. Later in the dormitory, he sat on his bed and thought about the word air. He thought about the Chamber of Secrets, a legend he knew from Hogwarts, a history which Hermione had summarized for him. Salazar Slytherin, a hidden chamber, a monster, an heir who could open it. He thought about Tom Riddle, born to a gaunt mother, descended from Salazar Slytherin, Parseltongue as a natural inheritance. He thought about the diary. He looked at Ron. The heir of Slytherin, he said. Riddle was Slytherin's heir. The diary Hermione found in her research, a black diary from Borgin and Burke's unaccounted for, it would have his intent in it, his agenda. If someone at Hogwarts has it, they'd be carrying a piece of Riddle, Ron said. Carrying a piece of Riddle who believes he is the heir of Slytherin, who had a specific plan for this school, who Harry stopped. Something clicked in his mind with the specific clarity of a mechanism completing. He opened the chamber before, when he was a student. Whatever is in the chamber is his creature, his control. The diary fragment would be trying to open it again. Who has the diary? Hermione said from the doorway she'd knocked before entering. McGonagall's rule about dormitory visits was a rule she took seriously. We don't know yet, Harry said. Then we find out, she said, coming in and sitting on Ron's bed, systematically before someone gets hurt worse than a cat. The someone who got hurt was Justin Finch Fletchley, and then Colin Creevey, and then several others, all petrified in the same suspended state as Mrs. Norris, all carrying the same basilisk shadow in their magical signature when Harry checked them carefully in the hospital wing. He didn't announce his findings. He added them to the growing map. He also, on a cold November afternoon, discovered he could speak to snakes. This was not new precisely. He'd had a conversation with a boa constrictor at the zoo 2 years ago that he'd assumed was a fluke, a trick of his nature, one of those unexplainable events that he'd filed and not examined. But he'd been walking through the second-floor corridor when he'd heard it, a voice, sibilant and moving through the walls, and before he'd had time to think about it, he'd answered. The snake in the walls had gone quiet, then come back with something like, "Who speaks?" And Harry had said, "I hear you," in the same register, the hissing grammar of it natural and immediate, and then caught himself and looked around. Ron and Hermione were staring at him. "That was Parseltongue," Hermione said. Her voice was careful. "You were speaking Parseltongue." "There's something in the walls," Harry said. "Big, alive, it heard me." "Is it?" Ron's eyes went wide. "The basilisk." "There's a basilisk in the walls of this school," Harry said, and the absurdity of the sentence was not lost on him, "and I can talk to it." He looked at the wall beside him, the stone cold and ordinary, "which means I can find it." "Harry," Hermione said slowly, "if you speak to it." "I'm not going to ask it to go away," Harry said. "It's not at fault. It was put here, it was made here, it answers to a specific command, and the voice giving that command is not the one commanding it to attack people. It's the diary fragment working through whoever has the diary." He put his hand on the wall. "What I want to do is find the chamber." "Because the diary fragment is in the chamber," Hermione said, not a question, following the logic at speed. "That's where it's been directing whoever has the diary, down to the chamber, down to the basilisk's home territory." "The petrifications aren't the goal," Harry said. "They're incidental. The goal is to get to the chamber, to use the basilisk, to I'm not sure yet what the endgame is, but the fragment needs a body. It needs energy. It's been building towards something," and he stopped. "Who has the diary?" They'd been trying to work that out for 2 months. The attacks had no clear pattern of proximity, different houses, different years, all of them with the defining characteristic of being Muggle-born or thought to be. The air of Slytherin's agenda, Riddle's agenda, carried in the fragment. "Ginny," Ron said very quietly. Harry looked at him. Ron's face had done something difficult. "She's been different since September. I thought it was new school, being the only girl, the family stuff. But she's been pale and tired, and she loses time sometimes. I've seen it. She'll be there and then not be there and not remember the in-between." He swallowed. "And she had a diary, a new one. She was writing in it constantly, and then she stopped. She said she threw it away. But she didn't look like someone who'd thrown something away. She looked like someone who'd had something taken from her." The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere in the walls, the basilisk moved, enormous and slow. "The fragment has been draining her," Harry said carefully, "building itself with her energy. That's the mechanism the diary takes from whoever writes in it, transfers the life force to the fragment inside. By now it might be," he looked at Ron. "How long has she been pale?" "Since September," Ron said, 2.5 months. "I need to find her," Harry said. "Now, where is she?" They found Ginny Weasley's note in the common room, on her favorite chair by the fire, written in handwriting that deteriorated at the end of each line and improved at the beginning of the next. The pattern of someone fighting to maintain control of their own hand. It said she was sorry, that it was her fault, that she had to stop it, and it ended mid-sentence. Ron read it once, his face very still, and then looked at Harry. Harry was already moving. "Get McGonagall," he said to Hermione. "I'm coming with, get McGonagall and then come find us," Harry said and looked at her directly. "Hermione, this is going to be something the school needs to know happened. Someone needs to be the responsible person who got the adults. That's not a lesser job, it's a necessary one." Hermione looked at him for one flat second, assessing whether this was the noble sending people away thing that Ron had called out in the first-floor corridor, and apparently satisfied herself that it wasn't, because she turned and went at a run. Harry and Ron went the other way. The entrance to the chamber was in the bathroom, as Harry had increasingly suspected. The cold spot in the second-floor girls' bathroom was one he'd noted in September and filed without acting on. The sink with the serpent engraving opened when he spoke to it in Parseltongue, a hissed command that Ron watched with wide eyes and no comment, and they dropped into the pipe and slid down into the dark. The chamber itself was ancient. Not Hogwarts ancient, not merely medieval, but genuinely old, in the way that things built by people who understood the deep logic of magic are old. The bones of the architecture carrying an intention that persisted centuries beyond the architect's death. Harry felt it as he walked through the stone serpent corridor, felt the depth of it, the age, the layers of magical intention laid down by a man who had been, whatever else he was, genuinely powerful. He also felt the basilisk somewhere ahead, very large, very alive, moving. "I can feel it," Ron said behind him. Ron had his eyes slightly narrowed, the particular expression he wore when he was focusing his nerve. "The cold, the thing from your description." "That's the fragment," Harry said. "It's ahead through the chamber." He paused. When we get in there, don't look directly at anything large that moves until I say it's all right. How will I know it's you saying it's all right and not the fragment speaking through something? Because the fragment can't produce my voice, Harry said, and if you're unsure, ask me something only I'd know. Like what? Like what Ron said when Hermione got the chess queen's path wrong in our practice game in October. Ron thought about it. I said she was playing too emotionally. And what did she say? Ron's expression did something caught between wincing and smiling. She said that I had no right to discuss emotional decision-making and then she beat me in 6 moves. There, Harry said, that's our code. Ron looked briefly as though he might laugh despite himself. He said, Chamber of Secrets, Fragment of Dark Lord, Enormous Snake, let's go. The chamber opened before them and it was vast and columned and greenlit and breathtaking in the way that things built with genuine terrible vision are breathtaking, and lying on the floor at its far end was Ginny Weasley. She was pale as paper, barely breathing, her hand still loosely around a black diary that lay open on the stone. Standing between them and Ginny, already turning at their entrance, was Tom Riddle. Not a fragment in a turban. A form nearly solid, nearly present, built from months of Ginny's life force, 17 years old and striking in the precise way that people are striking when they have built their appearance as deliberately as they build everything else. He held Harry's wand, which he'd apparently taken from Ginny's pocket. He looked at Harry. And then, just for a moment, something in his expression shifted. The confidence of the arrival, the theatrical villain's entrance, the "I've been expecting you," all of it stuttered just slightly at the sight of Harry's face and whatever Harry's face was currently communicating. Harry Potter, Riddle said, recovering. The famous. Where is Ginny's life force? Harry said, completely bypassing the introduction. How much has been transferred? Riddle blinked. This was clearly not the opening he'd prepared for. She'll die, he said. She's been giving me enough to answer the question. 80% perhaps, Riddle said, recalibrating, assessing the brilliant strategic mind doing what it did. Irreversible, I'd say, at this stage. Even if the diary were destroyed, what was taken? Irreversible by normal means, Harry said. He looked at Ginny, he looked at the diaries. He looked at Riddle, really looked at him, with the full faculty of perception and saw the fragment for what it was. Not Voldemort yet, not the terrifying adult force that had unraveled in the chamber below the school last year, but Tom Riddle at 17, rebuilt from a piece of intention cut off at that age, brilliant and cold and furiously committed to his own survival. And behind those eyes, the same thing Harry had seen in all of them, the same thing that ran through every fragment and every piece of a shredded soul. Fear. Dressed in control and brilliance and contempt, but underneath all of it fear. The fear of a boy who had grown up in an orphanage and decided that the answer to vulnerability was invulnerability, and had spent his life building the architecture of a fortress instead of dealing with the fact that he was afraid. Harry thought he would have been extraordinary. If he'd made different choices, he would have been extraordinary. The thought was sad and didn't change anything. Give me my wand, Harry said. I don't think so, Riddle said with the smile of someone who has 2 things Harry needs and knows it. You want the girl's life force restored, you want the wand. Neither of those happen unless I have a body, Harry said. You want a body. You want to complete the reconstruction. He looked at Riddle without anger, without contempt, with the clear-eyed patience of someone who has already mapped the end of this conversation. That's not happening. What you are is a fragment of an intention cut off at 17. You have no body to return to. The soul you were cut from has been shredded further since this piece was made, and the path you're describing leads nowhere. I'll find a way, Riddle said. There was something in his voice that was genuinely defiant, not the performance of defiance but the real article, the flat refusal of someone who has made survival his entire project. I always find a way. I know, Harry said. That's the problem. He looked past Riddle, past Ginny, at the enormous stone face of Salazar Slytherin at the far end of the chamber, the open mouth, the darkness inside it. He spoke in Parseltongue. Not to Riddle, Riddle spoke it too, it was no display. He spoke to the chamber itself, to the basilisk in the darkness behind those stone lips in the long, low register of a command that was not quite what the basilisk was used to hearing from a Parselmouth. He said, sleep. You have done what you were made to do and the making was not your fault. Sleep. And he sent the green warmth with it. The warmth that spoke to living things in the language of life, and the basilisk, enormous, ancient, genuinely magnificent in the way that very old creatures are magnificent, breathed out a sound like a mountain settling and lay down in the dark behind those stone teeth and went still. Riddle had watched this with the expression of someone whose primary tactical asset has just been removed. It doesn't answer to you, he said, but his voice had changed. It does now, Harry said. It's a living creature. Living creatures are my territory. He took a step forward. You don't have the wand in your hand anymore. Riddle looked down. The wand had drifted from his fingers, not dropped, not taken, simply drifted, the way things drift toward their rightful places, and it was in the air between them, rotating slowly. Wandless, Riddle said, and there was real assessment in it now, the brilliant mind working through the new information rapidly. You're doing this wandless how? I'm not doing anything with a wand, Harry said. I never needed a wand for any of this. The wand makes it tidier. He caught it out of the air. Now, Ginny. He crossed to her, and the space between him and Riddle was not a confrontation space, not a combat distance. He simply walked past the fragment as though it were a difficult piece of furniture, and crouched beside Ginny, and put both hands on her collarbone and closed his eyes. He felt it immediately, the absence of her, the vast space where 80% of her life had been and now wasn't. What remained was fragile, barely tethered, the remaining 20% burning hard to compensate for the loss like a fire using the last of its fuel. He put the green warmth into her. Not gently, there was no time for gentle. He pushed it in the way you push when something needs filling quickly, finding the shape of her, the specific quality of Ginny Weasley's life force, which turned out to be stubborn and bright and fiercer than its small container suggested. And he filled the shape of it with himself, with the warmth that was inexhaustible because it came from the source itself, from the place where all life ultimately began before it ever reached the living. He gave her back what had been taken. Ginny gasped. Her eyes opened, brown and sharp and immediately furiously alert, and she sat up, and the first thing she said before her eyes even fully focused was the diary. I have it, Harry said. He had it. He didn't know entirely when he'd picked it up. Somewhere in the process of crossing the chamber he'd taken it, and it sat in his hand now, and he could feel the fragment's presence in it screaming, the very specific scream of something that has just watched its months of work undone in 90 seconds and is now facing the person who undid it with the full weight of their attention. Harry looked at Tom Riddle. Riddle was not smiling anymore. He was standing in the chamber with the particular stillness of someone who has run every available calculation and not liked the results of any of them. In the green light of the chamber, 17 and brilliant and furious, he looked, for just a moment, very young. You could have been someone different, Harry said, not kindly, not cruelly, just truthfully. So could you? Riddle said. Yes, Harry said, but I am who I am and so are you. He held the diary in one hand. He felt the fragment in it pressing against the covers with everything it had. This is going to end now, not because I'm angry at you, not because I'm making a point. Because you're a piece of someone who needs to be whole before he can be finally addressed. And having you separated and running around causing damage doesn't serve that end. You're going to put me back, Riddle said, and there was something in his voice, not quite horror, but its sophisticated older cousin. You're going to put me back into what he's become. Yes, Harry said. He won't want me back, Riddle said. What he is now, what he chose to become, he cut this piece away on purpose. I know, Harry said, but a soul can't be dealt with while it's scattered. Every piece has to be accounted for. He held the diary up. This is going to hurt. I know, Riddle said, and there was something nakedly human in it, just for a moment. Something that was 17 years old and had never stopped being 17 years old. Trapped in a diary since 1943. And there was nothing in the world Harry could do about the tragedy of that except exactly what he was doing. He opened his palm and the green flame came, warm and complete, and he directed it at the diary with the specific focused intention of someone undoing a knot. Finding the thread of the fragment, the soul piece, pulling it free from its anchoring in the object and gathering it back into the vast network of intent and identity that it had been cut from, wherever in the world that battered remainder now existed, however far away. The diary screamed. Riddle screamed. The sound was the same sound, one voice, one identity, finally honest about what it was. Then the diary crumbled and the form of Tom Riddle dissolved and the chamber was quiet. Ginny Weasley was sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up and her chin on her knees, watching the space where Riddle had been. She was pale but present, all of her present, the fierce, stubborn warmth of her fully returned. Ron had made his way to her side and was sitting next to her and not speaking, which was the right call. Ron had very good instincts about when speaking was the wrong tool. Harry stood in the center of the chamber and breathed. Thank you, Ginny said to Harry very quietly. Are you all right? Harry said. I don't know yet, she said. I will be. She said it with the certainty of someone who means it as a decision rather than a prediction, and Harry thought that Ginny Weasley at 11 years old had more of the right quality in her than most people twice her age. Can we go up now? Ron said. I mean, this is incredibly impressive architecture and everything, but I'm starting to feel like the giant snake might reconsider going back to sleep. She won't, Harry said. She's fine, I asked her to sleep. You asked a basilisk to sleep. It was a polite command. Harry, Ron said with the tone of someone lodging a formal observation, your life is genuinely extraordinary. I know, Harry said. And then, because it was true and he'd been carrying it since August, and this seemed like the right moment to say it out loud. And I'm glad it's mine. The aftermath was everything and everywhere. Madame Pomfrey restored the petrified students with Mandrake Restorative in a process that took one afternoon and produced a ward full of extremely confused and briefly loud people. McGonagall and Dumbledore got a version of events that was complete enough to be useful and careful enough about the Horcrux detail. To avoid the conversation, Harry wasn't ready to have in public yet. Lockhart, who had apparently attempted to follow them, and then reconsidered and attempted a memory charm on himself in a crisis of nerve, was collected from the corridor near the bathroom and taken to the hospital wing and could not remember anything at all, which Harry thought was probably better for everyone. Dumbledore's end-of-year meeting was more substantial than the previous years. Harry told him about the diary fragment, about the restoration of the soul piece to the main remnant, about the basilisk. He did not tell him about the scar, he was saving that. The fragments, Dumbledore said carefully. You sent the diary piece back to wherever the main remnant is. Yes, Harry said, it won't make him stronger in any meaningful way. A fragment that old and that diminished doesn't add much, but it means he's slightly more coherent than before, which means he'll move sooner. He looked at Dumbledore. Tell me about the cup. Dumbledore was very still. I'm sorry, Hufflepuff's cup, Harry said. Hermione found it in her research. Riddle had it. He would have made a fragment vessel of it the same way he made the diary. Where is it? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. You've been researching the vessels. For a year, Harry said. Dumbledore breathed out slowly. I don't know where the cup is, he said, but I have a theory. He paused. I have several theories about several objects. He looked at his desk at something in the middle distance. Harry, when you say the fragment in the diary was restored to the main remnant, did you feel where the main remnant is? Could you tell? Albania, Harry said. Still weak, but not for much longer. He looked at Dumbledore. He needs a body, the same way the Quirrell fragment needed the stone. He will make a move for a body within the next year or two. Dumbledore nodded slowly. Then we have some time. Some, Harry said, which means the summer should be productive. He stood up. I want to know about every object Riddle ever owned, every location he was ever associated with. I want the full file. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I'm done working with partial information. Dumbledore looked at him, the blue eyes thoughtful, the expression that of a man who had spent a year adjusting his understanding of a situation and had mostly finished adjusting. I'll have it ready for you by morning, he said. Thank you, Harry said. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and said, without turning around, the scar. A pause. I know you have a theory. When you're ready to tell me, I'm ready to hear it. He went back to the dormitory and packed his trunk, and Hedwig regarded him from her perch with golden eyes that were calm and knowing, and Harry thought about fragments and souls and the long, patient work of putting things right and the summer ahead and all the things still to understand. He was not afraid of any of it, not even the question in his scar. Chapter 5. Bones and Fire. The summer before third year was the summer Dumbledore started being honest. It arrived in stages, the honesty, the way light arrives in a room with thick curtains. First a line, then a widening, then enough to read by. The first letter came in July, a week after Harry's 13th birthday, and it was 3 pages long and contained more real information than all of their previous conversations combined. The second came a week later. By August, they were exchanging letters 3 times a week, and Harry had filled a notebook of his own with cross-referenced notes and questions that Dumbledore answered with the careful thoroughness of someone settling a debt. The objects, a diary destroyed. A cup likely in the Lestrange family vault at Gringotts. A locket, formerly belonging to Slytherin, last recorded in a house called Grimmauld Place. A ring, in the ruins of the Gaunt family home in Little Hangleton. And Dumbledore wrote this one slowly. Harry could tell from the different pressure of the ink, possibly a snake. Nagini, a living vessel, which was a different and more complex problem than an object vessel. Harry sat with the snake information for a long time. A living Horcrux meant a creature that was simultaneously an innocent animal and a fragment container, a situation that required more care than smashing a cup or burning a diary. He wrote back to Dumbledore, "Don't do anything about the snake yet. I need to think about the right approach." Dumbledore wrote, "Agreed. There may be a method involving your specific capabilities that is significantly more elegant than the alternatives." Harry appreciated this. He appreciated Dumbledore's increasing willingness to recognize that Harry's approach to these problems was not simply a variation on standard wizarding methods, but something architecturally different that required different planning. It had taken the man a year and a half to get there, but he'd gotten there. The third letter, mid-August, was the one Harry had been waiting for. "The scar," Dumbledore wrote, "is what I feared it might be since your first year, confirmed by your description of the fragment resonance you felt in the chamber last term. Harry, I must tell you something that I have been working toward telling you with appropriate preparation, and I have decided that the appropriate preparation is simply to tell you plainly. The night Voldemort cast the killing curse at you in Godric's Hollow, his soul was already so fractured that the act of casting it again, the act of committing murder to sustain his existence, tore another piece free. Involuntarily. He did not intend to make you a vessel. The fragment simply had nowhere else to go in the instant of the curse's contact, and it went into the only living thing in range. You have been carrying a fragment of Voldemort's soul in your scar since you were 15 months old. I believe, and this is the part that has required the most careful thought, that your nature as a Thanatophoros has been doing precisely what you described, containing it, holding it. The fragment cannot influence you the way it influenced Ginny Weasley because you are not drawing on its presence for anything, and it cannot draw on yours because what you carry is not susceptible to depletion in the ordinary way. You are not in danger from it, but it is there. The question of how to remove it is one I do not yet have an answer to. I suspect you may. Harry read the letter twice. Then he folded it and put it in the drawer with the others and sat very still on his bed for approximately 10 minutes. Then he got up and wrote back, "Thank you for telling me. I've suspected since Halloween of first year. Yes, I have a theory about the removal. I'll need more time with it before I share it." He did not tell Ron and Hermione by letter. He told them on the train. Ron's reaction was immediate and almost physical. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his brow furrowed and said, "Right, so you've had a piece of Voldemort in your head for 13 years and it hasn't done anything because you're, what to you for it to work?" "Essentially," Harry said. "And you have a theory about removing it." "A developing one," Harry said, "and Dumbledore doesn't know the theory. He knows I have one, he's giving me room to work it out." Ron sat back. That's the most Dumbledore thing I've heard. I believe the 13-year-old with ancient death god powers has a theory. I'll trust him to get there." He shook his head. "All right, what's the theory?" Harry glanced at Hermione, who had been uncharacteristically quiet through this whole exchange, sitting with her hands folded in her lap and her expression doing the concentrated inward thing it did when she was processing multiple implications simultaneously. "The fragment in my scar is contained," Harry said. "My nature holds it, but it's still connected to the main remnant, faint, attenuated, but connected. When I destroyed the diary fragment, I felt the connection briefly, like plucking a string and feeling the vibration travel." He turned his teacup. "My theory is that the fragment in my scar can't simply be extracted the way a splinter is extracted, because it's not purely external, it's been integrated partially into the boundary between me and the other side. It's lodged in the veil-thin space that my nature maintains." "You're saying it's stuck between life and death," Hermione said quietly. "I'm saying it's stuck in me precisely because I exist in that boundary space," Harry said, "which means the solution isn't a spell or a potion. I think I have to go there deliberately, to the threshold, deep enough that the fragment thinks I'm actually dying and releases, and then I come back without it." The train rocked gently, fields went past the window, late summer gold. "You're describing a controlled near-death experience," Hermione said. "More of a deliberate threshold crossing," Harry said. "Not near-death, actual brief." "Harry," Ron said. "I come back," Harry said. "My nature comes back. That's the entire point of what I am. I live on both sides of that threshold simultaneously. It's not like a human dying, it's more like stepping into a room and stepping back out." "A room which is death," Ron said. "A room I've been standing in the doorway of my whole life," Harry said. "I'm not going to do it this year, I don't have the full method yet, but that's the direction of the theory." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was the one she wore when she had objections, and had already identified that the objections were not going to change the fundamental situation. "When you work out the full method," she said, "you will tell us every single detail before you do it." "Yes," Harry said, "and you'll have a plan for coming back," she said. "The plan for coming back is that I'm the claimed of Hades and it is not my time," Harry said, "and also that I'll ask." Ron opened his mouth, closed it. "You'll ask," he said. "You'll just ask Hades to let you come back." "He claimed me," Harry said. "He's been present my whole life in the way that things that have a claim on you are present, patient, not hostile. I think the answer will be yes." Ron looked out the window. "Sometimes," he said, "I forget that your situation is genuinely unlike anything else that has ever happened, and then you say something like, 'I'll ask Hades to let me come back from death,' and I remember very quickly." "Is it too strange?" Harry asked, and it was a genuine question. Ron looked at him. "Harry, you're my best mate. You could tell me you have a standing arrangement with the concept of entropy and I'd say all right and ask if it affects Quidditch." Harry laughed. The train rocked on, north and forward. Hogwarts received them and Hogwarts had changed, or rather Harry had changed, and Hogwarts was showing him more of itself in response. The castle revealed its deeper layers to those who were ready for them, and Harry at 13 was ready for layers he hadn't been at 11. He could feel the wards, the ancient protective magic woven into the foundations, the specific signatures of the spells laid down by the founders. He could feel where the magic was weakest, where the boundaries were most permeable, where the veil was thinnest in each wing. He could also feel very clearly the Dementors stationed at the school's perimeter. He'd felt them on the trains. He'd been sitting perfectly still when the train slowed and the temperature dropped and the lights went out and the thing had come, and it had come specifically to his compartment. He knew that, the way a tide comes specifically to the low ground. Ron and Hermione had gone gray and cold under the Dementor's effect. The new professor in the corner, a tired-looking man with graying hair and the specific quality of watchful intelligence that Harry associated with people who'd seen real danger. He'd produced a Patronus, silver and leaping, and driven it back. Harry had sat through the entire thing with the green warmth steady in his palms and an expression of focused attention. The Dementor had paused at the compartment window. It had turned its hooded face toward Harry with the blind seeking of something that found sustenance in despair and happiness draining, and it had recoiled, just slightly, the way the devil's snare had recoiled, the way Quirrell's cold pull had recoiled, the recognition of something that was the wrong shape for what it was trying to do. Lupin, the new professor, who had introduced himself before falling asleep before Hogsmeade, had watched this. Harry had felt his attention but said nothing. The Dementors were Azkaban prison's guardians, ministry-sanctioned, stationed at Hogwarts because of the alleged Sirius Black situation. A convicted murderer and supposed Voldemort supporter who had escaped from a supposedly inescapable prison and was reportedly coming for Harry. Harry had read the file Dumbledore had provided over the summer. Black, Sirius, 12 years in Azkaban, escaped in July, Dumbledore's private assessment indicating more questions than certainties. Harry's own assessment, formed over 3 days of careful thought, was that Sirius Black was not what the Daily Prophet said he was. He couldn't have articulated a full argument for this yet. He just knew in the way he knew things, the way he'd known Quirrell, the way he'd known about the diary, that the story as presented was missing something important. He didn't share this assessment widely. He kept it in the quiet place and waited for more information. Professor Lupin's defense classes were the best Harry had ever had, and this included the bar being entirely underground thanks to Lockhart. Lupin taught like someone who knew the subject from the inside, from encounters rather than textbooks, who had assembled his understanding of dark creatures and dark magic through the specific practical curriculum of personal experience. He was also, Harry noticed almost immediately, extremely good at reading students, at identifying what each person needed from the lesson and adjusting without making the adjustment visible. He was also, by the end of October, Harry's favorite teacher, which was a fact Harry hadn't expected to arrive at but found entirely defensible. The Boggart lesson was the one everyone remembered. The wardrobe in the staff room, the lining up, the transformed shapes of fear, a spider for Ron, a failing report card for Hermione, a Dementor for Harry. Or rather, the Dementor was what the Boggart attempted. The wardrobe shook. The door flew open. The Boggart erupted out in its formless seething and searched for the first mind it touched, and it found Harry's mind, and it reached in and looked for the deepest fear, the thing at the bottom, and then it stopped. It hung in the air in front of Harry in its half-formed state, not a Dementor, not a spider, not anything, cycling through shapes and finding none of them that fit. The room had gone very quiet. The Boggart tried Voldemort. It produced the shape, the tall, cold figure, the red eyes, and Harry looked at it with the patient attention he'd give any obstacle, and the Boggart flinched and dissolved the shape and tried again. It tried a graveyard. It tried a flash of green light. It tried, apparently in desperation, a vast and lightless void. Harry looked at the void and felt nothing but a mild familiar recognition, like seeing a room he'd been in before. The Boggart finally settled with what Harry could only describe as defeated reluctance on a very small shape, a cupboard door. Locked, the specific dark of the space under the Dursley stairs. There was a silence. "Ridiculous," Harry said, and the cupboard door opened and sunlight fell through it, warm and easy, and behind the door was a garden in summer. And Harry felt the Boggart's confusion as it tried to understand whether this was still fear and concluded it wasn't and gave up entirely. It fled back into the wardrobe. The class let out a breath collectively. Lupin was looking at Harry with an expression that was complicated and quiet and personal. The rest of the class was looking at Harry with varying expressions that Harry didn't examine because examining them would have required caring about them, and he was focused on Lupin. "Nice work," Lupin said with the careful neutrality of a man filing something very significant. "The cupboard was a nice touch," Harry said. "I didn't know they could be that creative." "They usually aren't," Lupin said. They looked at each other across the cleared classroom. Then someone knocked a stool over in the process of departing, and the moment was over, and Harry went to lunch. His first encounter with a Dementor on his own terms happened in November, on a Hogsmeade weekend, which Harry did not have permission to attend because the Dursleys had not signed his form, and Harry had not asked them to because asking the Dursleys for anything was an exercise that required a cost-benefit analysis. He was alone on the grounds, walking the lake's edge when the temperature dropped. Two Dementors had come off the perimeter, moving along the lakeshore, doing whatever perimeter Dementors did when the school was emptied for a Saturday. They didn't look like they were patrolling for a specific escaped prisoner. They looked like what they were, creatures of despair on a day when there was less happiness than usual to feed from. They moved toward him. Harry stood still and watched them come. He'd been thinking about this since the train, about the specific mechanism of what Dementors did and what he was and whether the two were compatible. Dementors fed on happiness, on warmth, on the presence of positive memory. They were, in the deep structural sense, the opposite of what Harry carried. They were the cold where he was the warmth. They consumed life force the way the diary had consumed Ginny's, the way the Quirrell fragment had consumed Quirrell, the same mechanism in a different form, which meant they functioned on the same register as his nature. Different polarity, same frequency. He reached out, not with his wand, he had his wand but this didn't need it. He reached with the green warmth, finding the Dementors the same way he'd found the Troll and the Basilisk and Ginny, feeling for the specific energy signature of what they were. What he found was unexpected. They weren't empty. That was the thing that struck him. He'd expected Dementors to be pure absence, pure cold, the presence of nothing. Instead, they were full. They were full of what they'd taken, the accumulated happiness and warmth of every person they'd ever fed from, stored and inverted like a room full of light with the windows painted black. The light was still in there. It was just being held wrong. He pushed green fire into them, gentle and warm, and something in the Dementors, something he'd have called surprised if he thought Dementors were capable of it, flickered. They stopped. They turned what passed for their faces toward him. He pushed the warmth further, finding the stored light inside them and reaching for it, not to consume it the way they consumed things but to release it. To open the painted windows. To let what had been held in there wrong move back to where it belonged. The Dementors made a sound. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of something being undone, and they did not want to be undone. Their nature resisted it the way cold water resists a warm hand, but Harry was patient and his warmth was inexhaustible, and eventually the resistance was less than the force being applied. The first Dementor collapsed. Not dramatically, not theatrically. It folded the way a shape folds when the structure holding it together is removed. And as it folded, something came out of it, not the screaming spiritual departure of the Quirrell fragment, but a gentle release. Like a sigh, warmth flooding outward into the cold November air, and the Dementor's physical form dissolved into nothing and the warmth dispersed, and the lakeshore was cold and ordinary. The second one tried to flee. It managed approximately 15 meters before Harry sent the warmth after it and unraveled it with the same patient thoroughness. He stood on the lakeshore in the November cold and breathed once slowly. He thought they were full of other people's happiness. All that time holding it wrong. He thought, I wonder if they knew. He looked at the place where the two Dementors had been and felt nothing, no danger, no triumph, just the steady warm certainty that had been with him since he was 1 year old sitting in a wrecked nursery, and he turned and walked back toward the castle. He ran into Lupin coming down the ground steps with a thermos and an expression of someone who had been watching from the castle steps for some time. Lupin handed him the thermos without speaking. Harry opened it, hot chocolate, he drank some, he handed it back. You should tell me what just happened, Lupin said. I destroyed 2 Dementors, Harry said. Release the energy they were holding back to wherever it came from. He looked at Lupin. I don't think Dementors can be affected by a Patronus charm long-term. It just drives them away. What I just did, they're gone, actually gone. Lupin was quiet for a long moment. The Ministry won't like that, he said. They use Dementors as guards. The Ministry uses creatures of despair that feed on humans as guards, Harry said without heat. That is a policy problem. I'll revisit when I'm old enough to vote. Lupin made a sound that was almost a laugh. Fair point. He looked at the lake, at the spot where the Dementors had been. Then he looked at Harry with the direct gaze of someone who had been considering saying something for 2 months and had decided the moment had arrived. I knew your parents, he said. Harry turned. James and Lily, I went to school with them. James was one of my closest friends. He said it with the specific cadence of something that had been thought about many times before being spoken. I've been watching you all term and you are so much your mother, the way you think, the patience of it, the depth. He paused. Your father was loud and generous and occasionally deeply aggravating, and you have almost none of that. I've heard he was loud, Harry said. He meant it gently. Wonderfully, Lupin said, at great volume and frequent expense to the feelings of Severus Snape. He paused again, the expression shifting to something that had more weight in it. Harry, what you just did, does Dumbledore know the full extent? He knows more than he did, Harry said. I tell him as I understand things myself. It's an ongoing process. He's always been good at waiting for things to arrive at their own time, Lupin said, more to himself than to Harry. Were you a marauder? Harry said. Lupin went still. Where did you, my father's map, Harry said. Or one of them, you are Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs. He watched Lupin's face. Sirius Black is Padfoot. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into water. Lupin's expression had done something complicated. He's not what they say he is, Harry said. I've thought so since before I knew you knew him. I can tell with people, whether they're running from something or toward something. The newspapers say he escaped to come after me. But everything I know about how humans work says that someone who escaped Azkaban after 12 years of Dementor exposure and immediately came after a specific target is not operating on revenge. He looked at Lupin steadily. He came because something changed, something he found out, something that finally gave him a reason to move. Lupin sat down on the castle step. He sat down the way Dumbledore had sat down on the chamber floor, with the sudden weight of someone whose carefully maintained composure has been temporarily set aside. Peter Pettigrew, he said quietly. If Sirius came because something changed, Peter is why. Peter is Wormtail, Harry said. Peter is alive, Lupin said, and the words came out with the controlled devastation of something that had been maintained as an impossibility for 12 years and was suddenly not. I think he's alive. I think he's been hiding. And I think Sirius has found out somehow, and if Peter is alive, then everything that happened the night your parents died was different from the official record, Harry said. Yes, Harry sat down on the step next to Lupin. The November wind came off the lake cold and steady. In the distance, the Hogsmeade students were beginning to make their way back up the hill, colorful specks moving against the gray afternoon. Tell me from the beginning, Harry said, all of it, the real version. Lupin looked at him, this man who had known Harry's parents, who was tired in the way that people are tired when they've been carrying something for a very long time, who had come to this school and found, sitting in his classroom, a 13-year-old who could unravel Dementors on a lakeside and then sit down and ask for the real version of events as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Yes, Lupin said. All right. He opened the thermos again. It starts with 4 boys and a secret. 4 boys who should have made different choices about what to do with knowledge. He talked, Harry listened. The afternoon went gray around them. Sirius Black appeared in the Gryffindor common room in early March, in the middle of the night, with a knife. And this was alarming to most people, but Harry was not most people. The dormitory screaming woke him, and he came downstairs to find Neville Longbottom pressed against the wall looking like he'd seen something that would require years of therapy. And McGonagall already there in her dressing gown. And the portrait of the fat lady explaining with great drama that she had been slashed, and had held the door regardless until the intruder tore the canvas. Harry looked at the evidence, the knife, the specific direction of entry, the choice of the Gryffindor Tower among all possible locations, and thought he was looking for Scabbers. Ron's rat Scabbers, Wormtail, who had been increasingly unhealthy since the start of term, losing weight and behaving erratically, and whom Harry had been watching with the careful attention of someone who knew what kind of creature might be found in a rat's shape. He didn't say this publicly. He went back to bed and thought, and in the morning he found Ron in the common room and said quietly, "Has Scabbers been near your bed lately?" Ron looked at him. "Yeah, he's why." "Keep him close," Harry said. "And tell me if he tries to run." The night of the full moon came in May, which was the month everything resolved, not cleanly, not without cost, but with the specific completeness of things that have been building for a long time and finally arrive at their moment. Harry had known about Lupin's condition since March, worked it out from the combination of the Boggart lesson, the dates, and the particular way Lupin moved on certain mornings with a specific stiffness that had nothing to do with age. He hadn't said anything because it was not his business to say, and because knowing didn't change anything, and because Lupin was an excellent teacher who deserved to teach. He had, however, prepared. The preparation involved a conversation with Hermione that had lasted 2 hours and covered the theory of animagus detection, the practical limitations of Wolfsbane potion, and the specific defensive properties of his own power relative to lycanthropy, which was, ultimately, a form of dark magic applied to a living creature. And dark magic applied to living creatures was within Harry's operational understanding. When the night came, it came all at once. The way events that have been building for months arrive when the conditions finally align. Sirius Black in the Shrieking Shack, Peter Pettigrew revealed and caught and real, Lupin's transformation beginning under a cloud-cleared full moon, and Snape, who had been following, who had suspected, who had history with all of these men that ran older and deeper than Harry's lifetime, arriving at exactly the wrong moment for everyone. The werewolf that Lupin became was enormous and lost and in pain, and Peter Pettigrew used the chaos to transform and run, and Sirius Black transformed into his animagus form, a great skeletal dog, and gave chase, and Harry stood in the clearing outside the shack with Hermione and a stunned Snape and made a rapid series of decisions. "Stay with him," he said to Hermione, nodding at Snape. "Harry, Sirius needs help," Harry said, "and Pettigrew is getting away." He ran. He found them by the lake, the great dog and the werewolf. A chaos of snarling and tangling, the dog trying to hold the wolf off and taking damage for it, and a small brown rat scrambling desperately across the wet grass toward the water's edge. Harry reached for Pettigrew first. The green warmth went out precise and targeted, and the rat felt it and stopped, felt the thing that living creatures felt when Harry's power touched them, and understood that stopping was the only option. The rat was so small and the life in it so thin and furtive that it barely resisted. Harry held it in place with the effort of holding a thought and crouched and picked it up and held Peter Pettigrew in his cupped hands. The rat looked up at him with beady, terrified eyes, and Harry looked back. He could feel the animagus form wrapped around the man inside like a second skin, and he could feel the man inside, thin and frightened and guilty in the specific way of someone who has lived with their guilt for so long it has become structural, a load-bearing wall. "Transform," Harry said to the rat quietly. "You know what I am, you know you can't run from me." Peter Pettigrew in the shape of a rat made a sound. "I know what you did," Harry said. "I know who you gave information to and what happened because of it, and I know you've been living as a rat for 12 years because you were more afraid of Voldemort than you were willing to be honest. I'm not going to hurt you." He kept his voice even, patient, the green warmth in his hands steady and surrounding. "But you are going to transform, and you are going to face this, and the people who deserve the truth are going to get it." A long pause. The distant sounds of the wolf and the dog, wrestling and struggling in the dark. Then Pettigrew transformed, a small and shaking man appearing in Harry's hands suddenly enough that Harry straightened and set him down, and Pettigrew stood in the wet grass looking at Harry with the eyes of someone who has been afraid for so long that being caught is almost a relief. "Go stand over there," Harry said, nodding at a tree. "Don't run, I'll know." He turned to the werewolf. Lupin in wolf form was larger than a natural wolf, driven by the moon's pull. The dark magic of the curse overlaid on a man Harry genuinely liked, and he was currently trying very hard to tear pieces off Sirius Black's animagus form. Sirius was holding on with the desperate strength of someone who had spent 12 years building himself toward this night and was not going to lose it now. Harry walked between them. He walked between a werewolf and a large skeletal dog and raised his hands, and the green light came, not gentle this time but steady and commanding, and the werewolf stopped. It turned its enormous head toward him. Its yellow eyes found his face, and it paused with the arrested attention of something that has encountered a signal it cannot ignore. Harry found Lupin inside the wolf, found the man, the consciousness battered and dim under the moon's pressure but there, and he pushed warmth into it the way he'd pushed warmth into the troll, the basilisk, the dementors. The moon couldn't be argued with. The lycanthropy couldn't be removed in a night. But the edge of the frenzy, the driving, consuming madness of the full transformation that could be settled, quieted. The way you quiet a fire not by extinguishing it but by removing what feeds it. The wolf sat down. It sat down with the specific bewildered heaviness of something that has been running very fast and has just realized it's tired. It looked at Harry with yellow eyes and a tipped head, and something in the look was almost not quite Lupin. "That's it," Harry said, "just sit." Sirius Black in dog form had also gone still. He transformed, emerging from the dog slowly, a thin and wild-haired man who looked like he'd been in Azkaban for 12 years, which was because he had, but whose gray eyes were sharp and clear and fixed on Harry with an expression of profound, speechless astonishment. "Harry Potter," Sirius said. His voice was rough, like something that had not been used for proper conversation in a very long time. "Sirius Black," Harry said. They looked at each other. The wolf sat between them, watching Harry with the patient attention of a creature that has been unexpectedly convinced to be calm. "You've got Peter," Sirius said, seeing the small shaking figure by the tree. "Yes," Harry said, "and you just talked down a werewolf." "Reasonably close approximation, yes." Sirius looked at the wolf, at Harry, at Pettigrew by the tree. A long, complicated expression moved across his face. "Your father," he said. "James would have had something to say about this. I don't know what, but it would have been loud." "I've heard," Harry said. "Your mother." Sirius stopped. His voice had cracked. He cleared it. "Lily would have understood exactly what you just did. She always understood things that were older than the textbooks." He met Harry's eyes. "I was supposed to be your godfather. That didn't go the way any of us intended." "No," Harry said. "I'm sorry for everything that—" "Tell me over time," Harry said gently. "Not tonight. Tonight we get Pettigrew to the castle and you get to see Dumbledore, and everything that needs to come out comes out." He looked at Sirius steadily. "You're free. You're going to be properly free. That's what tonight is for." Sirius Black looked at him, this thin, worn, 12 years in Azkaban man who had loved Harry's parents and had everything taken from him, and his gray eyes were very bright. "Lead the way then," Sirius said, with something in his voice that might have been the beginning of something better than what had been before. The Dementor situation at the castle gates became a crisis within 30 minutes of their arrival. because the Ministry's Dementors did not distinguish between a recaptured Pettigrew and a man they'd been instructed to guard against. And they descended on the group at the gates en masse, 8 of them, a crowd of cold and purpose, specifically targeting Sirius because he was the name on the warrant and the warrant was all they followed. Harry stepped in front of him. 8 Dementors converging. The temperature dropped 12 degrees. Hermione, behind him, made a sound of effort and produced her Patronus Silver Otter, which was beautiful and capable and not built for this quantity. Ron, beside her, managed his Terrier Patronus, but it flickered in the press of 8. Harry looked at the Dementors coming for him and felt again what he'd felt on the lakeshore in November, the wrongness of them, the stored warmth held inverted, the vast accumulation of taken happiness pressed into cold shapes. 8 of them, 12 years of Sirius Black's Azkaban held in these 8 shapes. Decades of other people. He breathed out once. The green warmth came. Not gentle this time, not the quiet, patient application he'd used on the lakeshore. This time it came the way a door opens in a storm, sudden and total, flooding outward in all directions at once, warm and certain and inexhaustible, and it met the 8 Dementors simultaneously and the unraveling began. 1 fell first, then 3 together. The remaining 4 had turned to flee, but Harry's reach was wider now than it had ever been. Expanded by necessity and emotion and the specific clarity that comes when you are protecting someone and everything inside you aligns around that purpose. And the green warmth found each of them in their flight and unwound them with the patient certainty of something that has all the time it needs. 8 Dementors. Gone. The warmth they'd been holding, released, dispersed into the air, and for just a moment the castle gates were the warmest they'd been all year. The gates were very quiet. Then Sirius, behind Harry, said Merlin in a tone of pure disbelief. "That's been building all night," Harry said, slightly out of breath, which was interesting because he'd never been out of breath doing this before. The scale must have cost something. He filed that. "Are you all right? I watched you destroy 8 Dementors," Sirius said. "I am the opposite of all right. I am entirely reconsidering my understanding of several fundamental concepts." "Join the queue," Ron said. "I've been reconsidering constantly for 2 years." Hermione had her hand on Harry's arm, checking not for injury, just the physical confirmation of presence, the same thing she'd done after the chamber. He nodded at her. He was all right. Something in him was tired, genuinely tired, in a way he didn't usually feel, but he was all right. Dumbledore's response to the evening's full accounting was to sit for a very long time in silence and then say, "The Patronus." Harry looked at him. "I understand you dispatched the Dementors without one," Dumbledore said carefully, "but Hermione tells me earlier in the year you destroyed 2 more on the lakeshore without a Patronus." "That's correct," Harry said. "Do you have one?" Dumbledore asked. "If you were to attempt it," Harry had thought about this. He'd been taught the charm, he understood the mechanism, a positive memory, focused, projected, and he'd never attempted it because the Dementors hadn't required it. He tried now, standing in Dumbledore's office at 2 in the morning with the afterglow of a very long night still in his bones. He reached for a memory, the train, Ron and Hermione falling through the portrait hole the first night. He pushed warmth into the wand with the specific incantation. The Patronus erupted from his wand. It was large. Much larger than a normal Patronus. It filled half the office immediately, a great solid shape of green-silver light that was brighter than any Patronus Harry had seen, brighter than Lupin's wolf or Dumbledore's phoenix, and the shape of it, the shape resolved slowly, massive and patient and impossibly ancient. It was not an animal. It was not a human form. It was a shape that existed in the mythology of every culture that had ever seriously thought about what came after, adapted from every tradition that had ever tried to put a face on the inevitable. And it was enormous and calm, and looking at Dumbledore's office with something that, if you were being very precise, looked like quiet satisfaction. Dumbledore sat very still. Fawkes on his perch ruffled his feathers and was also very still. "That's the Patronus of the claimed," Dumbledore said very softly, "the Thanatophoros's Patronus." He looked at it, looked at the great shape filling his office with green-silver light, and his expression was one of genuine, unguarded wonder. "I've read about this in very old texts. I never thought I'd see it." "It works," Harry said, pulling the Patronus back, the light retreating into his wand and then into nothing. "Yes," Dumbledore said, "I rather think it does." Sirius was eventually freed, not that night, not with the chaos of Pettigrew escaping again in the aftermath of Lupin's transformation completing its cycle and everyone's attention being briefly elsewhere. But over the summer, through Dumbledore's efforts and the testimony of several witnesses and a legal process that Harry tracked with the sharp attention of someone whose godfather's life depended on it, Pettigrew's escape was the failure of the night, the cost that Harry sat with honestly. He'd had him. He'd held him in his hands. And in the chaos of the wolf and the Dementors and Sirius, the small thin man had found a moment and taken it, and was gone before anyone could respond. Harry thought about Peter Pettigrew's eyes as the rat, the terror in them, but underneath, a desperate intelligence that had kept him alive for 12 years by being smart about when to run. He thought about what Pettigrew would do now, where he would go. He thought about Albania. He thought about the main remnant, weak and diminished and in need of a servant, and a servant in need of a powerful protector, and how neatly those two needs fit together. He'll go to Voldemort, Harry told Dumbledore in their summer correspondence. Yes, Dumbledore wrote back, I fear you're right. Then we have less time than we thought, Harry wrote. Pettigrew is capable. He'll find a way to give Voldemort a body. And with a body, the other fragments will be drawn to the main remnant and the connection will strengthen. How long do you believe we have? Harry thought about the weak, dim fire of the Albania remnant, felt along his inner sense for it, gauging the difference from a year ago, from 2 years ago, comparing. 1 year, he wrote back, maybe slightly more. He'll move in the summer after our 4th year if Pettigrew finds him quickly. That's my best estimate. Then your 4th year, Dumbledore wrote, is going to be very important. Every year is very important, Harry wrote back, but yes, more so than usual. He folded the letter and looked out his window at the summer garden, at the green, ordinary life of a July afternoon, at Hedwig watching him with her calm golden certainty. He thought about the peace in his scar, about the threshold crossing, the brief death, the asking. He thought about how close he was to having the full method worked out. He thought about fragments and souls and the long, patient work of putting the dead where they were supposed to be. He pressed his fingers to his forehead. The scar was warm. The fragment in it was quiet. Soon he thought to no one in particular, or maybe to all of them, to Hades' patient presence and his mother's warmth through the veil, and the fragment lodged in the boundary space of his own nature. Not yet, but soon. Chapter 6. The name written in Death's book. The Triwizard Tournament was announced at the start of term feast in September, and Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and listened to Dumbledore describe it and thought, this is the mechanism, not the tournament itself. The tournament was a cover, a structure, an event with enough chaos built into it, 3 tasks, an age line, a goblet of fire, hundreds of students from 3 schools to hide the real intention underneath. Harry felt it immediately, the same way he'd felt Quirrell's cold pull across a classroom, the same way he'd felt the diary's wrongness before he'd had the name for it. Someone was going to use this tournament to get Harry into a position where Voldemort could reach him. He ate his roast chicken and thought about it calmly. The goblet selected champions on the last day of October. Harry's name came out of it, which was surprising to everyone and surprising to no one. 4th champion, underage, impossible, and the hall erupted in the specific noise of several hundred teenagers simultaneously encountering a complicated situation. Harry looked at the slip of parchment with his name on it. He looked at the goblet, which was now pale gray and empty. He looked at Dumbledore, who was looking at him with an expression that was processing 17 things rapidly. I didn't put my name in, Harry said into the nearest portion of quiet. We know, Dumbledore said, his voice was controlled. Nevertheless, the rules of the tournament create a binding magical contract. The goblet's selection cannot be, I'll compete, Harry said. He folded the parchment. Someone put my name in deliberately. That means the tournament is a trap, and the trap was meant for me. The most useful thing I can do is spring it on my own terms. The hall was very quiet for a moment. Then Mad-Eye Moody, new defense teacher, weathered and scarred and watching Harry from the staff table with an eye that rotated independently of the other, said, Smart boy. Harry spent the first 3 weeks of October mapping the trap. He did this with the systematic patience he brought to everything, identifying variables, eliminating coincidences, building the shape of the plan from its observable edges inward. The goblet had been manipulated that required either exceptional skill or exceptional access. The only available suspects were students and teachers had access enough to make the student option less likely. Moody was the new variable. Dumbledore trusted him. Dumbledore's trust was not unconditional and was not unintelligent, but it was a data point. Harry watched Moody across defense classes with the same careful attention he'd given Quirrell, feeling for the cold pull, the wrong-shaped presence. What he found was not what he'd found in Quirrell. Not a fragment, not a soul piece, not the signature of something that didn't belong. What he found was something more subtle, absence. A specific kind of carefully maintained absence, the way a room feels when someone has cleaned it too thoroughly, erasing not just mess but the evidence that anything had ever been there. A kind of magical negative space. He mentioned this to Hermione. Holojuice potion, Hermione said immediately, in the tone she used when 2 pieces of information connected. I know because I've made it. She said this without embarrassment because Hermione had never been embarrassed about anything she'd done in the service of information. It replaces your magical signature with the donor's. If someone were taking it regularly long-term, which is extremely difficult and requires continuous supply, they could maintain someone else's appearance and suppress their own signature. The real Moody is somewhere, Harry said. If they have access to his hair continuously, she said, they need him alive, close, she paused. His trunk. Polyjuice takes an hour to brew at minimum, more for quality. They'd need a reliable supply of the donor. Room of requirement, Ron said from across the table, not looking up from his chess problem, or somewhere similar, somewhere you can hide a trunk large enough to contain a person. His actual trunk, Harry said. 7 locks, he mentioned it once, said his trunk had 7 different compartments. I thought he was just being paranoid. But if one compartment is large enough, you need to check, Hermione said. Yes, Harry said. But carefully, if Moody the fake Moody knows I'm suspicious, the plan changes. Whatever is intended to happen at the third task gets accelerated or substituted. He looked at his notes. I need to know who it is before I do anything, and I need to know what the endgame is. Graveyard, Ron said, still not looking up from the chess problem. That's my guess. You get taken to a graveyard and Voldemort gets a body. Harry looked at him. Ron moved a piece. What? It's the logical conclusion. You told us in your letter that Pettigrew would go to Voldemort. A year's passed. Voldemort needs a body. The fake Moody put your name in the goblet. The tournament tasks keep putting you in dangerous locations. At some point, the dangerous location becomes a portkey or something similar, and off you go to wherever Voldemort is. He looked up. Am I wrong? No, Harry said. So Ron said, the question is, do we let it happen? Harry looked at him for a long moment. Ron held the look with the steady gray eyes of someone who had thought this through and arrived at a position. If we intercept it, Harry said slowly, Voldemort doesn't get his confrontation, but he also doesn't stop. He finds another way, another year, another method, and we don't know where he is. He turned his teacup. But if we let it happen, if I go to the graveyard, you face him on his own ground, Hermione said. Where he's prepared. Where he thinks he's prepared, Harry said, there's a difference. The common room fire crackled. Several first years at a table nearby were doing homework with the focused energy of people not paying attention to the conversation at the other end of the room. You're thinking about using it to end this, Hermione said, not a question. He'll have a body, Harry said, a real body. Which means the fragments that are still scattered, Nagini, the cup, the locket, the ring, they'll be drawn toward him. The connection will strengthen, they'll all be pulling in his direction. If I can get to him while he's just reconstructed before the fragments fully reconnect, he stopped. And I need to deal with the scar before the graveyard, silence. The threshold crossing, Ron said, yes. You've worked out the full method, Hermione said. Yes, she looked at him. Tell us, she said, every single detail now, he told them. He told them the full theory, the threshold, the brief actual death, the asking, the return. He told them what he expected to find on the other side and why he believed he would come back. And he watched Hermione's expression move through several phases of intense processing, and Ron's expression do the thing it did when Ron was afraid but had decided that being afraid wasn't going to change his position. When he finished, there was a silence that lasted approximately 15 seconds. The anchor, Hermione said. You need an anchor on this side, something to pull you back once the fragment releases. Your nature might be able to return on its own, but if the crossing is deeper than expected, I know, Harry said. We're the anchor, Ron said flatly. Obviously. Yes, Harry said. When? Hermione said. Before the third task, Harry said. After the second, we have a window. Hermione nodded. She looked at her notebook. She looked at Harry. I have questions, 14 of them. Can we ask all of them? Harry said. Right now, she asked all 14. Harry answered each one. Ron contributed 3 follow-up questions that were characteristically more practical than theoretical. What does it feel like? Will you be able to move when you come back? Do you need to eat something first? And Harry answered those too, with the patience of someone who understands that the people who love you ask practical questions because they can't bear the theoretical ones. They did it on a Saturday in February, when the castle was quiet and Hermione had found a room on the 7th floor that didn't appear on any map, and seemed to have been designed by Hogwarts itself for exactly the kind of serious private purpose they needed. The room had a fireplace and 3 comfortable chairs, and Harry had a feeling Hogwarts had opinions about what was happening and had arranged the furniture accordingly. Harry sat in the center of the room. Ron sat to his right, close enough to touch. Hermione sat to his left with her hand on his wrist and her notebook closed on the floor beside her, which told Harry everything about the quality of her presence here. Walk me through it one more time, Hermione said, quietly. Not checking his theory, just hearing his voice, giving him the act of articulation as a form of steadying. I go to the threshold, Harry said. Deep enough that the fragment believes the death is real and releases, it'll flee back toward the main remnant instinctively, the way the diary piece fled back when I unraveled it. The difference is this piece is in me, so it has to pass through the veil to get where it's going. The moment it crosses is the moment I come back. He paused. The anchor, you two, means there's something on this side that I'm connected to. The connection is real enough to feel. It'll orient me for the return. How will you know to come back? Ron said, because it's not my time, Harry said simply. Because I have work that isn't finished. Because my name isn't written in Death's book yet. He looked at Ron. And because you're both here, he stopped. There was no precise word for what Ron and Hermione being physically present in the room meant to the calculation, but it was not trivial. It was possibly significant. The green warmth that lived in him had always responded to living things, to the specific bright warmth of people he cared about, and the two people in this room had warmth that he had been calibrating against since he was 11 years old. It matters that you're here, he said, more than the theory suggests it should. Good, Hermione said, and her hand on his wrist tightened once. Good, Ron said, and his shoulder pressed against Harry's steadily. Harry closed his eyes. He found the quiet place, not the metaphorical one, not the storage space for difficult knowledge, but the real one, the actual space his consciousness occupied in the threshold between states. He'd been standing in the doorway his whole life. All he had to do now was step through. He stepped through. The place on the other side was quiet. It was the quiet of after, of between, of spaces that exist outside of time's usual jurisdiction. It was dark with the specific quality of the dark that the mirror had shown him at Christmas in first year. The dark that wasn't absence of light but presence of a different kind of light. And it was warm in the way that being completely understood is warm. The fragment felt the crossing immediately. Harry felt it in his scar, the white-hot protest of something that was supposed to be embedded and was suddenly exposed, suddenly at the threshold with him, and understanding with the desperate intelligence of a Voldemort piece exactly what was happening. No, the fragment said. Not in words, in intention. Yes, Harry said back and pushed green warmth into the scar, steady and total. And the fragment's resistance was fierce and brilliant and absolutely insufficient. And it came loose with a sensation like a splinter finally drawn, like a knot finally untied, like a breath after too long without one. And it fled, exactly as Harry had predicted, across the veil, back toward the main remnant, leaving the scar clean and empty and finally just Harry. He stood on the threshold. He breathed, which was interesting because breathing at the threshold was a metaphorical action more than a physical one, but it felt real. Something in the warm dark was watching him. Something patient and vast and ancient, which had been present at the edges of his life since the night in the nursery, since the stars went out above Godric's Hollow. Not yet, Harry said. The patience in the dark did not argue. It was not the nature of genuine patience to argue. It simply acknowledged. And in the acknowledgement something shifted, the way it shifts when you have been waiting for something and the waiting has arrived at its natural conclusion and you both know it. Go back, the patience said, or didn't say, or said in the way that things without voices communicate to things that have them. Not yet, but we both know what you carry. We both know the work. Yes, Harry said. Your mother says, the patience said, or communicated or let Harry understand that she is proud, and that you should eat a proper breakfast. Harry laughed. On the threshold between states, 13 years old, he laughed, and the warm dark around him was full of warmth that was not just his own. Then he felt the anchor. 2 points of warmth on the other side of the veil, specific and familiar, a chess problem kind of mind and a footnoted kind of mind, both of them burning steady and clear and absolutely certain that he was coming back. He turned toward them. He came back. The gasp of air into real lungs was violent and immediate, and Hermione was saying his name in a voice stripped of every professional layer, and Ron's hand was gripping his arm so hard it would leave marks, and Harry opened his eyes on the firelit room and breathed and lived. Harry, Hermione said. I'm here, he said. How long? She stopped, looked at her watch, her face did something. How long? Harry said. 4 minutes, she said. You were 4 minutes, we couldn't. She stopped again. She was holding herself together with enormous effort, and Harry could see exactly how much effort it was costing her. I'm here, he said again. He looked at Ron. Ron was pale, but his grip on Harry's arm had not loosened, and he was looking at Harry with an expression that was made of equal parts relief and fury and something else that was just Ron, just the person who would follow Harry into a corridor full of dark wizards and call the traps a bonus. 4 minutes, Ron said. I know, Harry said. I aged 4 years in 4 minutes, Ron said. I want that on record. Noted, Harry said. Is it? Hermione's composure was returning, the professional architecture reassembling. Did it? Harry pressed his fingers to his scar. He held them there and felt nothing. No warmth, no foreign presence, no lodged fragment. Just skin and an old mark and the clean, ordinary sensation of his own existence undivided. It's gone, he said. Hermione sat back. She made a sound that was not words. Then she picked up her notebook and held it in her lap and breathed, and the breathing was deliberate, and Harry thought she might have had more writing on those 4 minutes than she'd ever have articulated in advance. Right, she said finally. Right, so the scar. Gone, Harry said. And you're completely me, Harry said. More completely me than I've ever been, actually. It's lighter. I didn't know it was weight until it was removed. He flexed his fingers. The green warmth was in them, steady and bright and clean. I think it was muffling things all these years, the fragment acting as interference. The signal is clearer now. Clearer how? Ron said with the tone of someone who wanted specifics because specifics were manageable. I can feel them, Harry said, the remaining fragments, the other vessels. He closed his eyes briefly, extending the sense, feeling along the threads of connection that led from the main remnant outward. The ring, I can feel where it is, the locket, the cup, the snake. He opened his eyes. Nagini is with him, Pettigrew found him. He has the snake close and the fragment in the snake is stronger than I expected. He's been feeding it. Then we have less time, Hermione said. We might be out of time for the preparation, Harry said. The tournament ends in June. If the trap in the third task is a portkey, we use it, Ron said. Harry looked at him. If you're going to end this, Ron said, with the calm finality of someone who has already done the thinking and arrived at the position well before the conversation started, you don't do it half-ready. You've been half-ready for 3 years and now you're not, and the opportunity is there and you take it. He met Harry's eyes. We take it, Ron. If you tell me I can't come, Ron said, I will point out that I spent first year playing a life-size chess game and second year going into the Chamber of Secrets with you and third year helping you restrain a werewolf, and my threshold for this is too dangerous for me, is somewhere I have not yet reached. Harry looked at Hermione. She had the expression of someone who had already had this conversation with herself. Same applies, she said. I'm aware of the risks. I've been aware of them since first year. I'm still here. He looked at them both for a moment, his oldest friends, his anchor. All right, he said, together, but I lead when we get there. Obviously, they said simultaneously with the specific tone of people who have never doubted this for a moment. The third task arrived on a Tuesday evening in June. The maze, enormous and hedged and full of enchantments that shifted with the dark. The other champions were Cedric Diggory, a Hufflepuff 7th year who was genuinely capable and had navigated the first 2 tasks with quiet competence, and the 2 imported champions from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. Harry felt the trap the moment he stepped into the maze. Not the hedges and the spells, those were what they appeared to be. The trap was 300 meters in, somewhere near the center, and it was cold. Cold in the specific way that portkeys were cold when they had been configured by dark magic for a specific destination. He moved through the maze at speed. He didn't have time to be careful about being careful. The fragment in his scar was gone, the interference was gone, and his perception was running at the clarity he'd felt in the February room and hadn't lost since. And he used it now, navigating by the specific signal of where the trap was and avoiding the enchanted obstacles not by solving them but by feeling which way they weren't pointing. He found Cedric first, in a pocket of maze with a blast-ended scroot that had cornered him against the hedge. Cedric had his wand up and the expression of someone who was managing. Harry walked past the scroot, looked at it and said, move. Not in Parseltongue, scroots weren't serpents. Just in the tone that worked, the one that carried the authority of something that living creatures recognized as being above them in a hierarchy that existed before language did. The scroot moved. It went around the corner of the hedge and did not come back. Cedric lowered his wand. He looked at Harry. Did you just tell a blast-ended scroot to move? Yes, Harry said. Are you all right? Fine, Cedric said, which was true and also the British word for 15 different states of not quite fine. What's? Stay close to the maze wall and go left until you're out, Harry said. The center of the maze has a trap, a portkey. Someone put my name in the goblet to get me here and the portkey is meant to take me to Voldemort. Cedric went very still. You know this. Yes, and you're still going toward the center. Yes, Harry said. Cedric looked at him for a long moment. He was 17 and serious and the kind of person who had built his values deliberately rather than inherited them, and Harry could see the decision forming in his face. I'm not going left, Cedric said. Cedric, I'm not going left, he said with pleasant finality. You clearly know more than everyone else about what's happening and I have no intention of letting you walk into whatever this is alone. I don't know what you are or what you're capable of, but you're 14 and I appreciate the sentiment, Harry said, but the portkey is configured for me specifically. It won't take you. Then I'll follow you into the center, you take the portkey, I fight whatever is in the maze until someone comes to get me, Cedric said. That's a plan. A bad plan, but a plan. Harry opened his mouth, closed it. Looked at Cedric Diggory, who was a Hufflepuff 7th year with good instincts and apparently an extremely high floor for what he was willing to do for someone he'd spoken to maybe twice. The portkey is the Triwizard Cup, Harry said. It's in the center, don't touch it. When I'm gone, use your wand, send up sparks, they'll come for you. All right, Cedric said, I can do that. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, Cedric said. Just come back. Harry looked at him. I will, he said, and it was the same quality of certainty as everything else he said. And Cedric, who had good instincts, believed him. The center of the maze was a clearing, and the cup was there on a plinth, and it was cold, the cold of a portkey configured with dark intent radiating outward in the still June air. Harry walked to it, he picked it up. The world yanked. The graveyard arrived all at once, dark and still and smelling of earth and old stone, a village in the distance, warm-windowed, unaware. Tall grass and weathered graves and the specific weight of a place where the dead were layered deep beneath the ground, and Harry felt them, all of them, the accumulated dead of Little Hangleton going back centuries, quiet and still in the way of the properly rested. He felt the main remnant immediately. Close, very close. Much stronger than Albania had been, a real body now, new and fragile and furious, and the warmth of it was wrong in the way that all of Voldemort was wrong. The specific wrongness of a life assembled from stolen pieces and sustained by choices that ran against every natural law Harry had ever understood. A figure emerged from behind the largest gravestone. Small and bundled, moving with the carefulness of something recently embodied. And Harry looked at it and felt the fragments, the main body and the scattered pieces, and the specific terrible wholeness of a soul that had shredded itself repeatedly in the belief that division was survival. He felt Nagini somewhere to his left, the great snake moving through the grass, her presence layered with the fragment embedded in her, the soul piece that had been living inside the snake so long the snake and the piece had grown into each other. "Harry Potter," said the voice from the bundled figure. It was higher than any voice should be and colder, and it carried the specific quality of something that had spent years in formlessness and was still adjusting to having a throat. "You came." "Hello, Voldemort," Harry said. A pause. He heard the figure's breathing. He felt along the threads of his perception the fury and the fear, always both, always fury on the surface and fear underneath. The specific terror of a man who had run from death for 50 years and was now standing in a graveyard with the one person in the world who was exactly what he'd been running from. "You should be afraid," Voldemort said. "I know you think that," Harry said. He looked at the graveyard, at the graves, at the village lights in the distance. "I've been feeling you for 3 years. Every fragment, every vessel, every piece of what you made yourself into trying not to be what you are. I know everything you feel and I know what's underneath it." He looked back at the bundled figure. "We've been building to this for 14 years. You must have had things you wanted to say." A longer pause. In the grass to Harry's left, Nagini stilled. Then Pettigrew, small and shaking, emerging from behind the gravestone, raised his wand and the ropes came and Harry let them. He let the ropes bind him to the graveyard's central grave, because struggling against ropes was not the priority, and because being physically restrained had no meaningful effect on what he could do. And he watched Pettigrew move with the specific quality of a man performing a ritual he was terrified of completing. The cauldron, the ritual, bone of the father, flesh of the servant, Pettigrew's hand, and the sound Pettigrew made was one Harry would have preferred not to hear. And he sent warmth toward the small shaking man before he could stop himself, stabilizing the life against the loss, because Pettigrew was guilty and frightened and had made terrible choices and was still a living thing in pain. Pettigrew looked at him with his remaining hand pressed to his chest and his eyes wide, and something complicated moved through his expression that Harry couldn't interpret in the moment. Then the cauldron erupted and Voldemort rose. He was tall. Taller than Harry had expected, because the form he'd been borrowing in memory and fragments and possession had always been constricted, always making do. This was Voldemort given room, a new body conjured fresh, and he stood in the graveyard with the specific expansion of something that has been cramped for a very long time and has finally uncurled. He was also, by Harry's precise assessment, afraid, not showing it. Not showing anything except the cold control of someone who had assembled a personality around control the way a castle is assembled around a keep. But Harry had been feeling his fear for years, had learned its specific texture, and it was here and it was large and it was familiar. Voldemort looked at Harry, bound to the grave, and something in his red eyes moved. "You're not afraid," Voldemort said, not an accusation, an observation, and underneath it, confusion, genuine confusion. The confusion of someone who has built their entire understanding of power on the principle that sufficient force produces fear, and is encountering for the first time something that does not respond to that principle. "No," Harry said. "You should understand what I am," Voldemort said. "I understand exactly what you are," Harry said. The ropes were tight but inconsequential. "You are Tom Riddle. You were born in a Muggle orphanage in 1926 and you had a gift that you decided meant you were owed something, and when life didn't agree with that assessment you started taking things instead. You split your soul because you were afraid of dying and you made yourself into something that can barely be called a soul at all anymore. You are brilliant and you are powerful and you have been running from the same thing your entire life." He kept his voice even, factual, not cruel. "I'm not afraid of you, I'm what you've been running from." Voldemort went very still. "The killing curse," Harry said. "Do you know why it didn't work? Not my mother's love, that was part of it, but it wasn't the mechanism. The mechanism was that you cast a death curse at someone already claimed by death. It was like throwing water at a fish. It didn't kill me, it healed me, and it tore another piece off your already shredded soul and lodged it in me, which I spent 3 years carrying around and removed in February. He flexed his hands against the ropes. The scar you gave me is clean now, it's just a scar. Something moved across Voldemort's face that was not in his repertoire. Something that was not anger or contempt or cold amusement. Something that was, for just a moment, just a flicker naked. You removed it, he said. I died briefly and came back without it, Harry said. Which is a capability you cannot replicate because the whole reason you're in a graveyard performing a resurrection ritual with a servant's hand is that you cannot do what I can do. You cannot stand on the threshold and choose to return. Voldemort looked at him. In the silence of the graveyard, the village was still lit and warm and the dead were still quiet beneath the grass. Kill him, Voldemort said to Nagini. To the snake in the grass, the snake moved. Harry looked at her. He felt the fragment in her, the piece of Voldemort embedded in the living creature wound through the snake's own consciousness, and he spoke to her in Parseltongue, low and immediate. Stop, I'm not your enemy. The piece inside you is not you. You are a snake and you were made into a vessel without your knowledge or consent, and I am asking you to stop. Nagini stopped. She was old and enormous, and the fragment in her had been there so long that the boundaries between snake and piece were genuinely blurred. But she was still, at her foundation, a living creature, and living creatures responded to Harry's nature the way compass needles respond to north. She turned her head toward him and tasted the air with her tongue and held very still. Voldemort made a sound that was not quite a word. I can feel all of them, Harry said. All the pieces of you. The ring, the locket, the cup, the vault at Gringotts, I know which one. The gaunt house in Little Hangleton, your ring is in the stone floor under the third board from the left. He watched Voldemort's face. I'm going to dismantle every vessel you made, and when I'm done, when all the pieces are accounted for, I'm going to do what I'm going to do to you now. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know. Because you are intelligent and running from something this long is exhausting and you deserve the truth of how this ends. Voldemort pointed his wand. Avada Kedavra, he said, and the green light came brilliant and cold and certain. Harry broke the ropes. He didn't struggle against them, he let the green warmth in his hands saturate outward and the ropes, being objects bound by ordinary magic, fell away immediately, and he raised his palm and let the killing curse hit it. It was warm. It was green and it was warm, and it met his palm, and the warmth that was already there absorbed it, dissolved it, inverted it, turned it inside out the way it had always done, the way it had done in Godric's Hollow when he was 15 months old. The killing curse shattered on contact with him into a spray of green sparks that drifted and faded, harmless, beautiful in the way that natural things are beautiful when they are in their right element. Voldemort stared. I've been telling you, Harry said, the whole time, you cannot kill me with that, you cannot kill me with anything you have. Death is not available to you as a weapon against me. He stepped forward. Off the grave, onto the graveyard grass. What I can do is what I've been doing all year, what I've been doing since I was 11 years old. I can find every piece of you. I can close every door you left open. I can pull every fragment back to the main remnant, and when they're all together, he reached out with the full range of his perception and found them all simultaneously. The ring in the ruined house, the locket wherever Regulus Black had hidden it, the cup in the Lestrange vault, the diary already gone, the Quirrell fragment already gone, and Nagini here and present. 5 remaining. He found them all and pulled the threads. The same mechanism as the diary fragment, gathering the soul pieces, drawing them back, not to the main remnant but through it, through and past and over the threshold in the direction they were always supposed to go. Voldemort screamed. The sound of it was the sound of something being finally, genuinely hurt, not by pain inflicted from the outside but by something internal, the screaming of all those separated pieces suddenly pulled toward a coherence they'd been prevented from reaching, suddenly in motion toward the place they'd been running from. Harry walked toward him, across the graveyard steady. The green warmth was coming off him in waves now, visible, lighting the grass and the stones and the distant village with a soft and steady green that was not the cold green of the killing curse but something older and warmer and more complete. Wait, Voldemort said. His voice was different. The cold control was broken, the carefully built persona cracking under the force of what was happening to him, and underneath it, Harry had heard it in the Quirrell fragment, in the diary fragment, in every piece he'd ever dismantled. Underneath the power and the fury was the voice of Tom Riddle. 17, 30, however old he'd been when the first cut was made. Wait. There are things I know, things about magic that no one else I know, Harry said. He stopped 4 feet from Voldemort. He looked at him directly. I know you are extraordinary, I've always known that. The tragedy of you is not that you weren't powerful enough. The tragedy is what you did with power you had. Voldemort started. No, Harry said, and it was not unkind. You couldn't. The person who could have made a different choice was Tom Riddle in an orphanage before the choices were made. That person is long gone. What you are now is what you chose, and what you chose was every fragment you cut away, every person you killed, every door you shut against the thing you were afraid of. He held Voldemort's red eyes. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because it is what I am, and it is long past time, and you know that. Some part of what you are knows that. Voldemort looked at him. Under the cold eyes, under the fury, under the long architecture of a man who had built himself against mortality, something looked back that was, very briefly, just tired. The darkness isn't what you think it is, Harry said quietly. I've been there. I stood there in February and I came back because it wasn't my time. It isn't dark, not really. The people you've been running from, he thought of his mother's hand on the glass of the hundreds of faces warm and watching in the mirror's reflection. They're there, they've been there. A silence, the graveyard was very still. I know you won't believe that, Harry said, but it's true. He reached out and put his hand on Voldemort's wrist. And the green warmth came, steady and full and complete, and found the main remnant, the fractured gathered soul of Tom Marvolo Riddle, and pushed. The sound that came from Voldemort was not the screaming of the fragments. It was quieter than that. It was the sound of something very large releasing, the sound a held breath makes when it finally goes, the sound a coiled thing makes when the tension finally leaves it. The body dropped. Slowly, without violence, without explosion, without any of the dramatics that power often insisted on. Just Voldemort's conjured form, vacated, settling into the graveyard grass with the simple finality of something that had done what it was going to do and had now stopped. Harry stood in the graveyard and breathed. Pettigrew was behind him, still and watching, his abbreviated hand wrapped against his chest. Nagini was in the grass to his left still. Pettigrew looked at Harry with the eyes of the man who had been a rat for 12 years, and Harry looked back. You stabilized me, Pettigrew said quietly. In the ritual, when the flesh was taken, you kept me from going into shock. Yes, Harry said. Why? Harry thought about it honestly. Because you were in pain, he said, and because I can, and because being guilty doesn't mean you forfeit the right to not be in pain. He looked at Pettigrew steadily. What you did to my parents, to Sirius, that has a cost. You know it has a cost. But the cost isn't your life, it's the rest of your life, and what you do with it, that's up to you. Pettigrew looked at him for a long moment. His expression was the most honest it had been in 12 years because there was nothing left to hide behind. I could have, he started. Yes, Harry said, you could have, at several points you didn't, but you're still here and Voldemort isn't, and what that means is up to you. He bent and picked up the Triwizard Cup. The portkey configuration was still in it. I'm going back. Come or stay. If you stay, eventually the ministry arrives and I can't predict what happens. If you come, I'll say what I said in the maze. The truth is better for everyone, and your truth includes 12 years of specific information about Voldemort's plans and methods that the wizarding world needs. He met Pettigrew's eyes. Your choice. Pettigrew looked at the vacated body of Voldemort in the grass. He looked at Harry. He looked at his wrapped hand. He would have killed me eventually anyway, Pettigrew said, when he didn't need me anymore. A pause. He always killed what he didn't need. I know, Harry said. Pettigrew took one slow step forward, then another. He reached out and touched the handle of the cup. Harry activated the portkey. They landed on the tournament grounds to a wall of noise that transformed in real time from excitement to alarm to something else entirely as the scene arrived all at once. Harry, Pettigrew, the cup, and no one else. The judge's table stood. Dumbledore moved first, moving fast for a man of his age, and reached Harry before the crowd noise had fully resolved. It's done, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, at Pettigrew, at Harry's face. He looked at the cup in Harry's hand. The main remnant, Harry said, is gone. The soul, all of it, the fragments gathered and moved through. Pettigrew can give you specific information about Albania, about the resurrection ritual, about the remaining vessels. We need to get to them before other Death Eaters do. He handed the cup to Dumbledore. I'm all right, I'll need to eat something. The scale was more than February. Harry, Dumbledore said, his voice was doing something unusual. I know, Harry said, and he knew what the voice was doing. He'd heard Sirius do the same thing in the graveyard when Pettigrew had been caught, the breaking open of something long held. Later, there's work to do first. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with the blue eyes that had been calculating and careful and gradually over 3 years had learned a different quality of regard for this boy standing in front of him. Then he nodded. Yes, he said, there is. Sirius needs to be told immediately, Harry said. He needs to hear about Pettigrew from us before the ministry gets involved in the narrative. And Hermione and Ron. Here, said Hermione's voice, and she was moving through the crowd with Ron right behind her, and she reached Harry and stopped and looked at his face with the comprehensive attention she gave to important things, and whatever she found there made her breathe out in a long, slow exhale. It's done, Ron said. It's done, Harry said. Ron looked at Pettigrew, then at Harry, then back at Pettigrew. You brought him back, Ron said. He chose to come, Harry said. Ron looked at Pettigrew for a long moment with an expression that was working through several things simultaneously: the private weight of a family name and a family wrong in 12 years and Sirius Black in Azkaban, and Harry watched him do it without rushing the process. Then Ron looked at Harry. Right, he said. What do we do first? Dumbledore is handling Pettigrew, Harry said. We need to get to Dumbledore's office and go through the vessel list before the evening is over. The ring in Little Hangleton, the locket. I have coordinates for the Gaunt house, Hermione said, already opening her bag. Of course you do, Ron said. I've had them since February, she said without apology. I thought we might need them. Harry looked at them both. He looked at the tournament grounds with the crowd and the noise and the June night warm around them, and the green warmth in his hands was steady and clean and entirely his own, undivided, uninterrupted, the clearest it had ever been. He thought about the scar, clean and empty. He thought about his mother's hand on the cold glass in December. He thought about the patience in the dark and the warmth that had let him return. He thought about Sirius, Free, and Pettigrew here and the long, slow work of the remaining vessels ahead, and beyond that the longer work of a wizarding world that had been living in fear for 40 years and was going to have to figure out how to stop. He thought about all of it and felt, instead of the weight of it, the clean particular satisfaction of a person standing exactly where they are supposed to be. The ring first, he said. Tonight, if Dumbledore agrees, the rest this summer. He looked at Hermione. I'll need those coordinates. She handed him the folded parchment. He looked at Ron. You don't have to come to Little Hangleton tonight, he said. Are you going to keep saying things like that? Ron said. Because my answer is always going to be the same. I know, Harry said. Then stop saying them, Ron said. Where are we meeting Dumbledore? They stood at the Gaunt house ruin 2 hours later in the deep dark of a June night with the stars very clear and close, and Harry crouched in the rubble and felt the ring exactly where he'd told Voldemort it was. The third board from the left. He lifted the stone with careful hands and looked at it. A gold ring with a cracked black stone that pulsed with the specific wrongness of a soul vessel, the fragment in it frantic with the residual awareness of what had happened tonight in the graveyard. He held it in his palm. He felt the fragment in it, smaller than the diary piece, older, more embedded, and he sent the warmth into it with the patience and certainty that he brought to everything. The fragment dissolved. The ring went cold and still. Just gold and a cracked stone, old and ordinary. 3 down, Hermione said quietly. 4 if you count Nagini, who I think. She came back through with us, Harry said. She's on the tournament grounds, she's just a snake now. He'd felt the fragment leave the snake in the graveyard, pulled through in the general movement of the soul's passage. What remained was a very large and confused serpent, which was a problem for the Ministry's magical creatures department and not for tonight. 3 down, 2 to find, the locket and the cup. This summer, Dumbledore said beside him in the dark. This summer, Harry agreed. He closed his fist around the ring, then opened it and let it fall back into the rubble. Just a ring, just a ruin. Just a dark June night in a village in Little Hangleton with the stars overhead and the warm breathing presence of 2 people he trusted completely standing behind him. He stood up. All right, he said. Let's go home. Hogwarts at midnight was the version Harry liked best. The fires banked and the portraits sleeping and the staircases doing their slow private movements with the ease of centuries. Harry walked through it with the particular awareness of someone who could feel the whole of it. Every life, every warmth, every shadow, the castle's vast accumulated age and intention. He stopped at a window on the 4th floor, looking out at the grounds, the lake dark and still, the forest at the edge of the light. He thought about everything. He thought about the graveyard and Voldemort's eyes going tired briefly just before the end. He thought about the fragment in his scar and the clean feeling of its absence. He thought about what Hades had communicated in the February dark. Your name is not written yet. And what it had felt like to stand on the threshold and be told to go back by the authority of the thing that had claimed him before he was 2 years old. He thought about the work still to do. The locket, the cup, the long process of convincing a wizarding world that the war was over. He thought about Sirius, who was free and had a house in London that was apparently terrible but structurally sound, and who had sent Harry a letter last week that had been 4 pages long and full of the kind of information about his parents that Harry had been quietly hungry for his whole life. He thought about Lupin, who was teaching again next year, whose position had been secured by Dumbledore over the Ministry's predictable objections. He thought about Ron and Hermione, asleep 3 floors up, who had never once flinched, who had never once treated what he was as anything other than a fact of him, like his hair or his green eyes, who had walked into every room he'd walked into and called it a bonus. He put his hand against the cold glass of the window and felt the castle breathe around him, all its warmth and age and intention. From somewhere deep in the stone, from the foundations, from the oldest layers of the building, from the architecture of a place that had been built with purpose and had maintained that purpose for 1,000 years, he felt something stir. Not a presence, not a fragment, just the deep, patient warmth of an old building that knew what it contained and was glad of it. Harry smiled. He pressed his forehead lightly against the cold glass and looked out at the dark lake and the bright stars and thought, not yet, but eventually. And everything between now and eventually is mine. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went back to the dormitory, past Neville's steady breathing and Seamus and Dean's and Ron who had one arm thrown over his face and was making the specific small sound that meant he was dreaming about chess. And he lay down in his bed in the warm dark and put his hands on the covers and felt the green warmth in them, steady and clean and fully his own. He closed his eyes. He thought hello to the patient presence at the edges of his existence, the vast old thing that had claimed him in a nursery and kept him ever since. The patient presence said nothing. It didn't need to. It had the entire length of Harry's life to say whatever it was going to say. Harry went to sleep. Outside the tower windows, the stars burned steady and close, and the lake was dark and full and still. And in the morning the summer would arrive, and after the summer there was more work to do, and Harry would do it, not because he had to, not because someone had shaped the path and set him on it, but because he was what he was, fully and finally and without reservation. The boy who lived. The death-touched boy that claimed he slept.